Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. I decided to take a break from work to get away from the city. My name's Alan Nelson, and I had this idea to go camping in my old RV, just me, nature, and some quiet time. My buddy Jacob Clay convinced me that we should check out a place near the Allegheny National Forest. Jacob was a bit of an outdoorsman, always dragging me on these adventures, but I trusted him. We loaded up the RV and set off. The forest was dense, and the roads were narrow and winding. Perfect place to unwind, Jacob said. The first day was calm, just setting up and getting the lay of the land. We picked a spot that was secluded, away from any trails or other campers. Jacob said it would give us the full experience, no interruptions. By the second day we were settled in. We had a fire going, beers in hand, and were just talking about life. The night was quiet, with only the sounds of crickets and the occasional rustle in the bushes. It was peaceful. Jacob went to bed early, saying he was tired from the drive. I stayed up a bit longer, enjoying the solitude. Around midnight I heard something. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. It was a faint, repetitive noise like something tapping or scratching. I figured it was an animal, maybe a raccoon. I didn't think much of it. The next morning, Jacob was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, and his stuff was still there. I called out for him, thinking maybe he went for a morning hike, but there was no answer. Hours passed, and I started to worry. Jacob wouldn't just take off without saying anything. I decided to look for him. I wandered into the woods, following a trail that seemed like it had been used recently. After about an hour I found something. It was Jacob's hat, torn and lying on the ground. Panic set in. I yelled his name, but there was no response. I headed back to the RV, thinking maybe he had returned, but he hadn't. I grabbed my phone and tried calling him, but there was no signal out here. That's when I noticed something odd. There were deep scratches on the side of the RV, like claw marks. It didn't make sense. What kind of animal could do that? That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept a flashlight and a knife close by. Every sound seemed amplified. Every rustle in the leaves made my heart race. Around 2 a.m. I heard it again, that tapping, scratching noise, but louder. It was coming from outside. I peered through the window, but saw nothing. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the RV. I jumped, heart pounding. I didn't dare go outside. I stayed inside, listening, waiting. The noise stopped after a few minutes, and silence returned. I barely slept, if at all. The next day, I decided I couldn't stay there. Jacob was missing, and something was out there. I packed up as quickly as I could and started driving, but the forest seemed endless, and the narrow roads felt like a maze. I was trying to keep calm, but my mind was racing. As I drove, I saw something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing in the road, just a glimpse before it disappeared into the trees. It didn't look human. I shook my head, trying to focus. I needed to get out of there. I reached a small town by evening and went straight to the local police. I told them about Jacob, about the scratches, about what I saw. They were skeptical at first, but they agreed to send a search party. Days passed with no sign of Jacob. The police found the campsite, the torn hat, the scratches, but nothing else. It was like he vanished. They questioned me multiple times, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. I knew what they were thinking. I couldn't go back to the forest. I stayed in a motel, waiting for any news. One night I had a knock on my door. It was one of the search party members. He looked shaken. He said they found something deep in the woods, a clearing with strange symbols carved into the trees and remnants of what looked like a ritual. But no sign of Jacob. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the searchers said. What kind of ritual? Who or what did this? And where was Jacob? I started researching, trying to find any clue, any similar stories. I stumbled upon local folklore about a creature, a guardian of the forest, but not a friendly one. They called it the Watcher. The more I read, the more it made sense. The scratches, the noises, the figure I saw. But it didn't explain everything. Why Jacob? What did he do to attract its attention? Weeks turned into months. Jacob was declared missing, presumed dead. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. What if I had done something different? What if I had gone after him sooner? I couldn't stay in that town. Too many memories, too many questions. I moved back to the city, trying to get back to my life, but the nights were the hardest. Every sound reminded me of that forest, of Jacob. I started seeing a therapist, trying to deal with the trauma. It helped a bit, but the nightmares continued. I kept seeing that figure, the Watcher, in my dreams, standing at the edge of the forest, waiting. A year later, I got a call. It was from the local police. They found a body deep in the woods. They thought it might be Jacob. I flew back, needing closure. The body was decomposed, almost unrecognizable, but they confirmed it was him. The police ruled it as an animal attack, but I knew better. It was the Watcher. They didn't believe me, of course. Just another crazy story, another unsolved mystery. I went back to the site one last time. The clearing with the symbols was still there, untouched. I stood there feeling a chill down my spine. I whispered Jacob's name, hoping for some sign, some closure, but there was nothing. Just silence. I left the forest, promising myself never to return. But the Watcher stayed with me, in my mind, in my dreams. I moved on as best as I could, but the memory of that camping trip, of Jacob, of the Watcher, never faded. Years passed, and I tried to live a normal life. But every time I saw a forest, every time I heard a strange noise at night, I was back there, in that RV, with Jacob. The scars, both physical and mental, remained. I never went camping again. The RV sat in storage, a relic of a past I tried to forget. But some nights, when the wind howls and the shadows play tricks on my mind, I can't help but wonder, what if the Watcher is still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting camper? In the end, it didn't matter. Jacob was gone, and nothing would bring him back. The forest had its secrets, and I had mine. And as much as I tried to move on, part of me was always left behind in that dense, silent forest with the Watcher. So that's my story. I know it sounds crazy, but it's what happened. And if you ever find yourself near the Allegheny National Forest, remember Jacob, and be careful, because the Watcher is out there. And it never forgets. I had always loved camping. There was something about being out in nature, away from the grind and hum of everyday life, that appealed to me. My name is Jasper Lear, and every few months I would take my RV and head out to some remote location. This time I picked a spot in the Ozarks near the Buffalo National River. I'd been there a few times before, and had always found it peaceful. This trip, however, would be anything but. It started on a Thursday. I had taken a week off from work to unwind. I work as a software engineer, which can be stressful, and I needed this break. My friend from college, Oliver Dwyer, decided to join me. Oliver was always up for an adventure, and I appreciated his company. We loaded up the RV with supplies and hit the road. The drive was long but pleasant. We chatted about old times, joked about our college days, and made plans for the camp. We reached the campsite by late afternoon and found a nice spot by the river. We set up camp, built a fire, and settled in. The first night was uneventful. We cooked some hot dogs, had a few beers, and turned in early. The next morning, we decided to hike along the river. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, and the air was crisp. We followed the trail for a few miles, enjoying the scenery and the tranquility of the forest. After a couple of hours, we came across an old, abandoned cabin. It looked like it had been there for decades, maybe even longer. "Hey, Jasper, check this out," Oliver said, pointing to the cabin. "Looks like something out of a horror movie." "Yeah, it does," I replied, feeling a bit uneasy but also curious. "Let's take a look." We approached the cabin cautiously. The door was slightly ajar, and it creaked as we pushed it open. Inside it was dark and musty. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floor was covered in dirt and leaves. There was an old table in the center of the room, and a few broken chairs scattered around. "Looks like nobody's been here for a long time," Oliver said, picking up an old rusted lantern. "Yeah," I replied. Let's head back. This place gives me the creeps. We left the cabin and continued our hike. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was nothing there, just the forest, silent and still. We returned to the campsite in the early afternoon and decided to go for a swim in the river to cool off. The water was cold but refreshing. We splashed around for a while, then got out and dried off by the fire. As the sun began to set, we cooked dinner and settled in for another quiet night. But it wasn't quiet. Around midnight, I was woken by a strange noise. It sounded like something was moving around outside the RV. I sat up and listened. There it was again, a rustling sound followed by a low grunt. "Oliver, wake up," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. What is it?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "Listen," I said. "Do you hear that?" He sat up and listened. The noise came again, louder this time. It sounded like something big was moving through the bushes. "What the hell is that?" Oliver asked, now fully awake. "I don't know," I replied, "but I'm going to check it out." I grabbed a flashlight and my pocket knife, the only weapon I had. I opened the door of the RV and stepped outside. The night was pitch black, and the forest was silent. I shined the flashlight around but couldn't see anything. "Be careful, man," Oliver said from the doorway. I nodded and walked toward the sound. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. The rustling sound came again, this time from the other side of the campsite. I turned and shined the flashlight in that direction. For a split second, I saw something, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. Then they were gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Yeah," Oliver replied. "What the hell was it?" "I don't know," I said, "but we need to be careful." We spent the rest of the night on high alert, but nothing else happened. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave. Whatever it was, we didn't want to stick around to find out. As we were loading the RV, we heard a scream, a woman's scream, coming from somewhere nearby. We dropped everything and ran toward the sound. We found her by the river, a young woman in her 20s, covered in blood. "Help me!" she cried. "Please help me!" "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "It's my boyfriend," she sobbed. "Something attacked him. It was a monster." Oliver and I exchanged a look. "Could it be the same thing we saw last night?" "Where is he?" Oliver asked. "Over there," she pointed toward the trees. "Please, hurry." We ran in the direction she pointed. As we got closer, we saw him. He was lying on the ground, motionless. His body was covered in deep gashes and his face was pale. He was dead. "Oh my God," Oliver whispered. "What could have done this?" "I don't know," I replied, feeling sick to my stomach, "but we need to get out of here. Now." We helped the woman back to the RV and drove to the nearest ranger station. We told them what happened, and they sent out a search party. They found more bodies, a group of hikers, all dead, with the same injuries as the woman's boyfriend. The rangers were baffled. They had never seen anything like it. The woman's name was Sarah. She was in shock, but she managed to tell us what happened. They were hiking along the river when they were attacked by something. She didn't get a good look at it, but described it as a large, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. The rangers advised us to leave the area immediately. They said they would investigate, but they couldn't guarantee our safety. We didn't need to be told twice. We packed up and left, driving as fast as we could. For the rest of the trip, we were on edge. Every noise, every shadow made us jump. We kept the doors locked and the windows closed. We didn't stop until we were miles away from the campsite. When we finally got home, we were exhausted. We hadn't slept in days, and the events of the past week had taken their toll. We agreed not to talk about it to anyone. Who would believe us anyway? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. A few weeks later, I received a call from one of the rangers. They had found more bodies, and they still had no idea what was responsible. They advised us to stay away from the area and to be cautious if we ever went camping again. I haven't been camping since. The memories of that trip still haunt me. I still see those glowing eyes in my nightmares, and I still hear the woman's screams. Whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. We never found out what it was. Some locals started calling it grith, a name from some old folklore. It's just a word, but it sticks with you. Grith. The thing that turned a peaceful camping trip into a nightmare. The thing that left a trail of bodies in its wake. The thing that might still be out there, lurking in the shadows. Oliver moved to another state, and we don't talk much anymore. We both changed after that trip. It's hard to explain, but something like that sticks with you. It makes you different. As for me, I still work my job, still live my life, but I don't go out into the woods anymore. I stay away from the places where the darkness feels too thick, where the silence is too deep. I tell myself it's just being cautious. But deep down, I know it's fear. The kind of fear that doesn't go away, no matter how much time passes. And that's my story. Believe it or don't, it doesn't matter. I know what happened. I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there, Grith is still waiting. My name is Patricia Jordan, and back in 2019, I found myself deep in the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. I'd always fancied myself an amateur photographer with a penchant for dad jokes. Yeah, I'm that person who laughs at their own puns. I decided to take a solo trip to capture the vibrant autumn foliage, thinking it would be a great way to clear my head after a messy breakup. Plus, what better place to test out my new camera than in one of the most biodiverse areas in the United States? I arrived at the park early in the morning, my car packed with camping gear, snacks, and an optimistic spirit. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. As I strapped on my backpack, I couldn't help but chuckle at the squirrel that seemed to be judging me from a nearby branch. "Don't worry, buddy," I called out. "I'm nuts too." Setting off on the trail, I marveled at the canopy of reds, oranges, and yellows above me. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a warm glow on the forest floor. I snapped photos of anything that caught my eye, a cluster of mushrooms here, a curious deer there. Hours flew by, and before I knew it, I was several miles deep into the wilderness. Around midday, I stumbled upon a small clearing with a trickling stream. It seemed like the perfect spot to take a break and have lunch. I sat on a fallen log, munching on a peanut butter sandwich, when an older hiker emerged from the opposite side of the clearing. He looked like he'd seen his fair share of the outdoors, weathered face, rugged clothes, and a walking stick that had clearly been with him for years. "Afternoon," I greeted him with a nod. He gave me a curt nod in return. "You alone out here?" "Yep, just me and my camera," I replied, holding it up. He glanced around nervously. "Be careful in these parts. Strange things have been happening." I raised an eyebrow. "Strange like what? Bears telling knock-knock jokes?" He didn't laugh. "People going missing. Found a campsite the other day, tents torn up, gear scattered, no sign of the campers." I felt a slight chill but shrugged it off. "Probably a black bear looking for food. I'll make sure to hang my food bag up high." He shook his head. "It wasn't no bear. Just be cautious." Without another word, he continued down the trail, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Well, that was ominous, I muttered to myself. Deciding not to let a cryptic warning ruin my trip, I finished my lunch and set off again, aiming to reach a good spot to set up camp before sunset. As the afternoon wore on, the trail became less defined. I checked my map and realized I might have taken a wrong turn. "Great job, Patricia," I sighed. "Lost in the woods. Classic." I tried to retrace my steps, but everything started to look the same. The towering trees and dense underbrush were disorienting. Just then I heard rustling behind me. I turned, expecting to see another hiker or maybe a deer. Nothing. "Hello," I called out. Silence. I laughed nervously. "Must be the wind," I said, though the air was eerily still. Pressing on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Dusk began to settle, and the forest took on a different character. Shadows stretched between the trees, and the sounds of wildlife grew louder. I needed to find a place to camp, but the terrain was uneven and covered in thick brush. Finally, I found a small flat area beneath a large oak tree. As I set up my tent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Guess I'm not cut out for the wilderness after all, I joked to myself. I decided to make a quick dinner, a can of soup heated over a small camp stove. The warmth was comforting, and I started to relax. Climbing into my tent, I settled into my sleeping bag and scrolled through the photos I'd taken. The vibrant colors and candid shots of wildlife lifted my spirits. Maybe getting lost wasn't so bad after all. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of twigs snapping nearby. My eyes snapped open. The moonlight cast a pale glow through the tent fabric. "Probably just a raccoon," I whispered. Then came a low rumbling sound, something between a grunt and a snarl. Not a raccoon. My heart pounded as I quietly reached for the flashlight beside me. Switching it on, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. At first I saw nothing unusual. The forest was still, almost too still. Then, about 20 feet away, I noticed movement. A large, shadowy figure was hunched over something on the ground. I squinted, trying to make sense of the scene. The figure stood up, and I realized it was unlike any animal I'd ever seen. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with a muscular build covered in coarse, dark fur. Its limbs were elongated, and its hands, or were they paws, ended in long, sharp claws. The head resembled that of a wolf, but larger and more menacing. I stifled a gasp, but apparently not well enough. The creature's ears perked up, and it turned its head in my direction. Yellow eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Well, this isn't good, I thought. My mind raced. Ignoring every instinct to freeze, I zipped the tent back up and scrambled to gather my things. Think, Patricia, think. I grabbed my pocket knife, not that it would do much good, and my flashlight. A loud ripping sound tore through the air as the creature slashed through the side of my tent. I stumbled backward, falling onto the forest floor. The beast loomed over me, its hot breath visible in the cold night air. In a panic, I shone the flashlight directly into its eyes. It recoiled slightly, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet. I ran, branches whipping against my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear the heavy thud of the creature's footsteps. It was fast, too fast, desperate. I veered off the trail, hoping the dense underbrush would slow it down. Ahead, I spotted a narrow gap between two large rocks. I squeezed through, my backpack scraping against the stone. The creature snarled in frustration, say, unable to fit through the gap. "Ha! Didn't think about your diet plan, did you?" I muttered, adrenaline fueling my bravado, but my relief was short-lived. It began clawing at the rocks, dislodging chunks of stone. I didn't wait to see if it would break through. I continued running, my lungs burning and legs aching. Suddenly, I burst into another clearing. To my horror, I saw remnants of a campsite, tents shredded, gear strewn about, and dark stains on the ground. I approached cautiously, the metallic scent of blood filling the air. There were signs of a struggle, deep gouges in the earth, broken branches and bodies, 3 of them torn apart in a way that no animal should be capable of. I fought back the urge to vomit. "This can't be real," I whispered. A morbid thought crossed my mind. At least I wasn't alone anymore. Dark humor at its worst. A blood-curdling howl echoed through the night, snapping me back to reality. The creature was getting closer. I searched the campsite for anything useful. One of the victims had a hunting rifle clutched in a death grip. With trembling hands, I pried it loose and checked the chamber. Loaded. "I'm not much of a hunter, but desperate times," I muttered. I found extra ammunition in a nearby backpack and stuffed it into my pockets. Positioning myself behind a fallen log, I aimed the rifle in the direction I'd come from. The forest fell silent again, the calm before the storm. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every muscle tensed, then movement, a blur of dark fur weaving between the trees. It emerged into the clearing, eyes gleaming with predatory intent. It spotted me instantly. "All right, big guy, let's see how you handle this," I said, steadying my aim. I fired. The recoil nearly knocked me over, but the bullet hit its mark, striking the creature in the shoulder. It roared in pain but didn't go down. Instead, it charged. I fired again and again, each shot slowing it but not stopping it. "You've got to be kidding me!" I yelled, fumbling to reload. With a final desperate effort, I aimed for its head and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and the creature stumbled, crashing to the ground mere feet from where I stood. Breathing heavily, I kept the rifle trained on it. The massive form lay still, blood pooling beneath it. "Is it over?" I wondered aloud as I cautiously approached. The body began to change. The fur receded, limbs shortened, and before my eyes it transformed into a human, a man in his late 40s with familiar features. It was the hiker I'd met earlier. "What the—" I was at a loss for words. Questions swirled in my mind, but there was no time to process them. I heard more howls in the distance, multiple this time. "Time to go," I decided, grabbing a flashlight from the campsite. I sprinted toward what I hoped was the direction of the main trail. After what felt like hours, I saw the faint glow of headlights through the trees. Stumbling onto a park road, I flagged down a passing ranger vehicle. "Whoa there, what's going on?" the ranger asked as he rolled down the window. I was out of breath, disheveled, and probably looked half-crazed. "There's something in the woods. People are dead. We need to call for help." He eyed the rifle slung over my shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower the weapon." I quickly dropped it. "It's not mine. I found it at a campsite. The people there were attacked." He radioed for backup and escorted me into the vehicle. As we drove back to the park station, I recounted what had happened, careful to stick to the facts without sounding insane. Within the hour, law enforcement and additional park rangers were dispatched to the area. They found the campsite as I described, along with the bodies. Investigations were launched, but no concrete explanations were given. The official report cited animal attacks, possibly by a pack of wolves. The wolves hadn't been native to the area in decades. Curious and unsettled, I began digging into local legends and records. I discovered stories dating back centuries about shapeshifters in the region, beings that could move between human and animal forms. It seemed far-fetched, but after what I'd witnessed, it was the only thing that made sense. The man I'd met, the older hiker, had warned me, perhaps trying to steer me away from danger or from discovering his secret. I left the Great Smoky Mountains with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. Some legends are rooted in truth, and sometimes the monsters wear familiar faces. Let me take you back to a camping trip that still haunts me to this day. You know, just a regular guy named Everett McCall, with a taste for adventure and a knack for finding trouble where there shouldn't be any. This trip started out like any other, just a weekend escape to unwind and recharge, but it ended up being something entirely different. It was me, Everett, and my two buddies, Willard Harrow and Judson Benz. We decided to take the RV out to the Oconee National Forest. Willard had just gotten it, a real beauty, and we figured a few days in the wilderness would be the perfect way to break it in. I remember making a joke about how nothing bad ever happens when you take a new RV out for its maiden voyage. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? We set out on a Friday morning. The sky was clear and the road was smooth. We talked about everything under the sun, work, relationships, the usual stuff. Willard was going through a rough patch with his girlfriend, so we were all ears, giving advice, mostly bad, but that's what friends are for. By the time we reached the forest, we were ready for some beers and a campfire. The first night was perfect. We set up camp, got a fire going, and spent the evening under the stars. The air was crisp, and there was this perfect silence that only the middle of nowhere can provide. We roasted marshmallows and swapped stories, some of them even true. Judson, being the prankster he is, tried to spook us with tales of Bigfoot sightings, but we laughed it off. Saturday morning, we decided to go hiking. The forest was dense, the kind of place that makes you feel small and insignificant. We found a trail that looked promising and set off, backpacks loaded with snacks and water. Willard, always the nature enthusiast, kept pointing out different plants and animals. At one point he spotted a deer, and we all stood still watching it disappear into the trees. It was one of those moments that make you appreciate the simple things in life. But then, things took a turn. It was late afternoon when we decided to head back. The light was starting to fade, and the forest took on an eerie quality. I remember thinking how quickly the mood can shift out there. We were about a mile from the campsite when we heard it. A rustling in the bushes. Willard stopped dead in his tracks, and Judson, always the skeptic, rolled his eyes. "Probably just a raccoon," he said. The rustling got louder, more insistent. It didn't sound like any raccoon I'd ever heard. Willard, always the curious one, decided to check it out. "Stay here," he said, as if we were going to charge into the unknown without him. He crept towards the sound, and we waited, exchanging nervous glances. Then we heard it. A scream, short and sharp. Willard screamed. We ran toward him, hearts pounding, calling his name. When we found him, he was on the ground, clutching his leg. Blood was seeping through his jeans, and his face was pale. "It bit me," he gasped. "Something bit me." We helped him up, half carrying, half dragging him back to the RV. I remember the fear in his eyes, the way he kept looking over his shoulder. Whatever had attacked him was still out there. We managed to get him inside and cleaned up the wound as best we could. It was nasty, deep, and ragged, like nothing I'd ever seen before. That night, we barricaded ourselves in the RV. None of us slept. Every noise, every rustle set us on edge. We talked in hushed tones, trying to make sense of what had happened. Judson, ever the rational one, tried to come up with explanations. "Maybe it was a wolf," he suggested, but deep down we all knew it was something else. The next morning we decided to pack up and leave. Willard's leg was getting worse, and we needed to get him to a hospital. But as we started the RV, we realized we weren't going anywhere. The engine was dead. Judson, who knew a thing or two about cars, popped the hood and took a look. "Someone's messed with it," he said, his voice grim. "We're not going anywhere." Panic set in. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere with something or someone out there. We decided to stay put and wait for help. Willard was getting worse, his fever climbing. We did our best to keep him comfortable, but there was only so much we could do. It was that afternoon when things really went to hell. Judson and I were outside trying to get a signal on our phones when we heard a noise from inside the RV. A low, guttural sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We rushed back in to find Willard convulsing, his eyes rolled back, and foam bubbling at his mouth. He was dying, and there was nothing we could do. Judson tried CPR, but it was too late. Willard was gone. We sat there in shock, not knowing what to do. The air inside the RV was thick with the smell of death and fear. We decided to bury him, but as we were digging the grave, we heard it again, the rustling. This time it was closer, more deliberate. We dropped the shovels and ran back to the RV, locking ourselves inside. The rustling grew louder, closer, until it was right outside. Judson grabbed a knife, the only weapon we had, and stood by the door. "Whatever it is, we're not going down without a fight," he said. The creature attacked that night. It came at us with a ferocity that was almost unreal. Judson tried to fend it off, but it was too strong, too fast. I watched in horror as it tore into him, blood spraying everywhere. I tried to help, but I was paralyzed with fear. By the time it was over, Judson was dead, and I was alone. I stayed in the RV, too terrified to move. The creature circled, its shadow moving in and out of the moonlight. It didn't leave, just waited, watching. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I had to do something. In the early hours of the morning, I made my move. I grabbed what little food and water I could find and slipped out of the RV, moving as quietly as I could. The creature was still out there, but I didn't look back. I just ran, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away. I wandered through the forest for hours, maybe even days. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, I stumbled upon a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver, a kind old man named Hank, took one look at me and knew something was wrong. He drove me to the nearest town, and I told the police everything. They found the RV, but there was no sign of the creature. Willard and Judson's bodies were gone too. The official reports said it was a wild animal attack, but I knew better. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't an animal. It was something else, something out of a nightmare. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat hearing that rustling sound. I've read everything I can find on strange creatures and unexplained phenomena, but nothing matches what I saw. Sometimes I think about going back, trying to find answers, but I know better. Some things are best left alone. And that's my story. As unbelievable as it might sound, I lost 2 good friends that weekend, and a part of myself as well. If you ever find yourself in the Oconee National Forest, do yourself a favor and stay on the trails. You never know what might be out there waiting. As for the creature, I gave it a name in my head, something to make sense of the senseless. I called it Gosh. It's a name that fits, somehow. A word that sounds like it came from the depths of the forest, as ancient and mysterious as the thing itself. Maybe one day someone will figure out what it really is, but for now it's just a dark memory, a story to tell around the campfire, a reminder that the world is full of things we can't explain. My name's Mason Campbell, and back in 2020, I decided to set out on what I thought was just going to be a peaceful camping trip. I'd rented an RV and was headed up to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, one of the last real wilderness areas left in the Midwest. I'd just gone through a messy breakup, one of those the dog stays with me deals, and thought that getting into the thick of nature might clear my head. Of course, I thought I'd be on my own for a few days, doing nothing more than fishing, grilling, maybe reading a bad detective novel. I wasn't really prepared for anything out of the ordinary. I mean, who would be? So there I was, parked at a site that was basically as far out as my RV could take me, not a single soul in sight, just me and the trees pressing close, the smell of pine, and the sounds of wind rushing through thick branches. I had my own little campfire going, cooking a half-burned hot dog and poking at the coals with a stick. The campsite was wedged between a rock face and a narrow trail that led into a small valley. The only access road was a twisting, barely there dirt path, something you'd need 4-wheel drive just to crawl through, which was exactly why I'd chosen it. I figured it would be a nice quiet evening, maybe even boring. Around dusk, though, I heard something in the distance. At first, I brushed it off as a deer or some animal rustling in the brush, but it got louder. It was the kind of sound that sticks in your gut because it's too out of place, not the typical crunch or snap of branches you'd expect, but something else, something heavier and somehow purposeful. I tried to laugh it off, muttering something dumb to myself like, "All right, Bigfoot, don't make me come over there." But the noise kept going, each crunch louder, closer, then silence, the kind of silence where you feel like the whole world's holding its breath. Out of nowhere, a man just walked right into my camp as if he belonged there. No warning, no hello. Just there he was, tall, wiry, with a face that looked like it had been whittled out of driftwood. He wore an old military jacket, camo pants, and heavy black boots caked in dried mud. His hair hung down like dirty straw, and there was something off about him, the way he stood too still, staring right at me with this dead expression, like he'd seen the worst things imaginable and carried them with him. "Got any spare firewood?" he asked, his voice low and scratchy, barely above a whisper. I don't know why, but my instinct was to play it cool. I told him, "Sure, there's some by the fire," and gestured to a small pile next to my cooler. He just stared at me, unsmiling, before he picked up a few pieces and stacked them onto my fire like he owned it. Then he sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the dirt under his nails. "Nice spot you got here," he said, still not looking away. "Yeah," I mumbled, trying to keep things light. "Good place to get some peace and quiet. Not many folks around." Peace is what people say they're after until they find it, he replied, poking the fire with a stick. I laughed awkwardly, wondering what he was on about. He just sat there still, like he was waiting for something. After a few more minutes of awkward silence, I tried to steer the conversation back to normal, asking if he was camping nearby. He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the flames as if he hadn't heard me. Finally, he looked up, fixing me with this unnervingly blank look. I don't camp, he said, his voice steady, cold. I'm just passing through, following an old path. It was at that point I started feeling like I might have made a mistake coming up here alone. This guy, whoever he was, didn't seem like someone who'd gotten lost on a weekend getaway. He felt intentional, the way he just sat there, his words dripping out slow, his gaze dark and unblinking. I cleared my throat, trying to break the spell. Well, I'm heading out tomorrow anyway. Got to get back to civilization, right? I said, forcing a laugh. The man didn't blink. You sure about that? Now, here's the thing. I was getting uncomfortable, but I didn't want to look like I was afraid of him, especially when we were miles from anyone who'd hear me if I yelled. Instead, I tried to play it off, leaning back in my chair and cracking another cheap joke about Bigfoot. But the man didn't laugh. He just kept staring at me, his gaze sharpening, as if he was sizing me up. Then he asked, "You ever feel like something's watching you out here?" Not really, I lied, though by now my skin was crawling. I shrugged and took a long sip from my bottle, hoping he'd take the hint and move along. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. They come out at night, you know, the quiet ones, the ones who don't belong anywhere else. You don't see them, but they see you. They know when you're alone. I tried to keep my face neutral, though inside, every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away. But what was I going to do? Just get up and walk into the trees with him sitting right there? So I sat there, trapped, my mind racing, waiting for him to give up and go. Eventually he stood up, and I felt this rush of relief, until he looked down at me and said, "Careful, not everything that goes into the woods comes back out." With that, he turned and walked off, disappearing down the path toward the valley. For a few minutes I just sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. I kept telling myself that he was just some weirdo, that I'd laugh about it later. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every sound, every whisper of leaves, felt like it had a purpose, like it was waiting for me to let my guard down. Sometime around midnight, I heard the noise again, louder this time. I got up, grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area. Nothing but shadows. I almost convinced myself it was all in my head until I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone ducking behind a tree. I yelled out, "Who's there?" hoping I sounded more intimidating than I felt. No answer. I shone the flashlight in the direction where I'd seen the movement, and that's when I saw it. A small pile of sticks arranged in a circle right by the edge of my campsite, like some kind of makeshift trap or marker. And right in the center was my old pocket knife, the one I'd left back in the RV. I didn't waste another second. I spun around, scrambling back to the RV as fast as I could. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, and I barely managed to get the door shut before I heard footsteps crunching outside. Inside, I locked everything I could, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I peered out through one of the windows, just in time to see him standing there in the beam of my flashlight I dropped. He didn't even look angry, just determined. Without taking his eyes off the RV, he reached down, picked up my flashlight, and flicked it off, plunging everything into darkness. My whole body froze. I didn't know what to do, so I just waited, every nerve on edge, listening for any sound, any clue. Then, like some horror movie cliché, I heard the slow scrape of metal along the side of the RV. I don't know if it was a knife, a piece of wire, or something worse, but he dragged it slowly, deliberately, making sure I knew he was still there, waiting. I gripped my phone, fingers shaking, as I tried to dial 911, but there was no signal out here. Nothing. Hours passed like that. Every now and then he'd make another sound, tapping on the window, scraping along the wall, or whispering something I couldn't quite make out. Just loud enough to keep me alert, just quiet enough to keep me guessing. Then, as dawn started to break, I finally worked up the courage to peek outside. He was gone, or at least I thought he was. The campsite was dead quiet, like he'd never been there at all. But the ground around my RV was littered with sticks, broken branches, and strange little symbols carved into the dirt right by my door. He'd left a note, scrawled on a scrap of bark, a final parting gift. The note was simple. Not everything that goes into the woods comes back out. Remember that. I didn't waste any more time. I threw everything I could grab into the RV, fired up the engine, and got out of there without looking back. When I decided to take the RV out for a solo camping trip, I was craving a bit of peace and quiet. My job had been running me ragged, and I figured a weekend away in the middle of nowhere would do the trick. I'm Willard Murphy, by the way, but you can call me Will. I work in a busy tech firm, and the stress had been piling up. A little isolation sounded perfect. I headed to a small, tucked-away campsite in the Ozarks, a place I'd heard about from a buddy at work. It wasn't on any tourist maps, which was exactly what I needed. I packed up my RV with the essentials: food, beer, a couple of good books, and my fishing gear. The drive was uneventful, the kind of drive that lets you unwind before you even reach your destination. Trees whizzed by, and the road was mostly empty. I pulled into the campsite late afternoon. The place was deserted, which suited me fine. I set up camp by a small, clear lake, perfect for fishing. I got the fire going, cracked open a beer, and sat back to enjoy the quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. As night fell, the air turned chilly, and I added more wood to the fire. I sat there enjoying the solitude, the stars bright overhead. Eventually I decided to call it a night and headed into the RV. I woke up early the next morning, eager to get some fishing done. The lake was calm, the kind of calm that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. I cast my line and waited, enjoying the stillness. A few hours later I had a decent catch and decided to head back to camp. It was then that I noticed something odd. The door to the RV was open. I was sure I'd locked it. I felt a twinge of unease, but shrugged it off. Maybe I'd forgotten in my haste to get fishing. Inside, everything seemed in order, so I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. I spent the rest of the day exploring the area, hiking through the dense woods. The scenery was beautiful, but there was something about the quiet that felt different. It wasn't the peaceful silence I'd hoped for. It felt more like the forest was holding its breath. That night, as I sat by the fire again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just not used to being out in the wild alone. I decided to turn in early, trying to convince myself that a good night's sleep would fix my nerves. I climbed into the RV, locked the door, and settled into bed. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a loud thud. I sat up, heart pounding, listening intently. Another thud, followed by a scraping sound, like something dragging across the side of the RV. I grabbed a flashlight and my fishing knife, the closest thing I had to a weapon. Slowly, I crept to the window and peered out. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then the beam of my flashlight caught something. It was quick, darting out of sight almost as soon as I saw it, but it looked like a person. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding braver than I felt. "Who's out there?" No answer, just the continued scraping sound. I decided to step outside, hoping it was just some animal that I could scare off. As soon as I opened the door, the scraping stopped. The sudden silence was unnerving. I shone the flashlight around, scanning the trees and the ground. Nothing. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything, but the only sound was my own breathing. Feeling foolish, I went back inside, double-checking the locks. I kept the knife within arm's reach and laid back down, though sleep didn't come easily. Every little noise had me on edge. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy, but more determined to enjoy the day. I shook off the events of the night as my mind playing tricks on me. I spent the morning fishing again, catching a couple of decent-sized bass. By the afternoon, I was feeling more relaxed, the unease of the previous night fading away. It wasn't until evening that things took a turn for the worse. I was sitting by the fire, cooking my catch for dinner, when I heard it again, the scraping sound. But this time it was louder, more insistent. I stood up, knife in hand, and called out again. "Who's there? Show yourself." Still no response. I walked around the RV, flashlight and knife ready. As I rounded the back, I caught sight of something moving just beyond the edge of the light. It looked like a figure, but it was too quick to make out any details. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't alone out here. I decided to stay by the fire, figuring the light would keep whatever it was at bay. The night dragged on, the fire crackling and the occasional sound of something moving in the dark keeping me on edge. I barely slept, keeping watch until the first light of dawn. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolved to figure out what was happening. I decided to hike deeper into the woods, thinking maybe I could find some answers. I packed a bag with some supplies, grabbed my knife, and set out. The forest was dense, the trees blocking out most of the sunlight. I followed a faint trail, my senses on high alert. After about an hour, I came across something that made my blood run cold. There, in a small clearing, was a makeshift campsite. It looked like it had been abandoned for a while, but there were signs that someone had been living there recently. A torn sleeping bag, scattered cans of food, and a few personal items. I looked around, trying to find any clue as to who might have been here. Then I saw it. On a tree, carved deep into the bark, was a single word, Grindle. I had no idea what it meant, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I decided it was time to head back to my RV. As I turned to leave, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. A low, guttural sound like a growl, but more primal. I didn't wait to find out what made it. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, not stopping until I was back at my campsite. I quickly packed up, deciding it was time to get out of there. As I started the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I drove down the winding road, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. I was almost out of the forest when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The figure didn't move. I honked the horn, but it just stood there. Slowly I inched the RV forward, trying to get a better look. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was gaunt, his clothes tattered, and his eyes wild. As I got closer, he suddenly moved, darting into the trees. I fled, not wanting to stick around to see what he'd do next. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the main road. I pulled over, trying to catch my breath and calm down. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back there. I reported what I'd seen to the local authorities, but they didn't seem too concerned, just another crazy story from a city guy out in the woods. But I knew what I saw, and I wasn't sticking around to become another missing person. I don't go camping alone anymore. That trip was enough to last me a lifetime. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scraping sound and see those wild eyes in my nightmares. Whatever Grindle is, it's out there, and I hope I never cross its path again. My name's Roy Walker, and this all happened back in 2016, in the middle of a fishing trip near Banff, Canada. My friends always say I'm the reluctant outdoorsman, so you can imagine how convincing they had to be to get me to join. My idea of a weekend is more like catching up on movies than catching fish, but they swore it'd be a relaxing getaway. So I figured, what could go wrong? I joined my friends Greg, Tim, and Jesse at this little cabin they'd rented just outside Banff. Right from the start, the place felt weird. It was miles from any civilization, hidden in a dense cluster of trees with just enough space between them for sunlight to make it through. But they insisted it was all part of the charm. Greg went on about how peaceful it would be to get away from it all. No phones, no internet, just us and nature. The first day was admittedly not bad. We grilled, threw back some beers, and shared a few laughs around a fire. Greg was the only one genuinely interested in fishing, so we mostly left him to it while Tim and Jesse tried, unsuccessfully, to teach me how to set up a proper tent. It was a pretty good setup. But that was before the night noises started. That first night, just as the fire began to die down and the guys started drifting off to their tents, I heard something. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. A strange, low noise that didn't fit with the usual sounds of crickets or rustling leaves. I nudged Tim, who muttered something about my city boy imagination, and went back to sleep. I told myself he was right. I probably just wasn't used to all these forest sounds. But the next day, Greg found something weird down by the lake where he'd been fishing alone. He showed us a patch of trampled grass and broken branches leading from the water up to the edge of the woods. I'm telling you, it was like something big came up from the lake, he insisted. Tim rolled his eyes. What, like a bear? Greg shook his head. Nah, bigger, and there aren't any fresh bear tracks around here. Despite Greg's concern, we brushed it off as him trying to spook us. The day went by as planned. More fishing, more jokes, more beers. I almost forgot about the noise from the night before. Almost. Later that night, though, as we sat around the fire, the same sound came again. This time, it was louder and closer. It was like a cross between a howl and a snarl, low and drawn out enough to set my teeth on edge. Jesse stopped mid-sentence, and we all looked at each other, our faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. Nobody said a word. Then the sound came again, this time from the direction of the lake, and it was getting closer. Tim laughed nervously. Maybe it's Greg's lake monster come back to check on us. He was trying to play it cool, but I could tell he was on edge. We decided to head inside the cabin and lock the doors, just in case. The walls were thin, and it wasn't the most secure structure, but it felt safer than being out in the open. We set up camp in the cramped living room, each of us sleeping on whatever piece of furniture we could find. I was just drifting off when I heard it again. But this time, it was so close that I felt it vibrate through the floorboards. There was something prowling outside, something heavy that dragged its feet, moving back and forth in front of the cabin. We were all dead quiet. Even Tim had lost his usual bravado. Then came a thud against the door, like something or someone was pressing on it, testing it. Tim held a knife, Jesse had a flashlight, Greg had a fishing rod. I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. But when I saw the door visibly bow under the pressure, I stopped breathing. Whatever was outside, it wasn't human, and it was way too strong. Greg whispered, "Do you think it's like some animal we don't know about?" I didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Another thud hit the door, harder this time. We could hear wood splintering. That's when Jesse, holding the flashlight, peered through the gap in the curtains. "Oh God," he whispered, barely audible. His face went pale, and he took a shaky step back. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the door, his mouth moving like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally he muttered, It looked like a wolf, but not right, too tall, and it was standing." Greg groaned. "This isn't happening." But it was. We all heard it. Whatever was outside let out a kind of grunt, something almost human but animalistic, like a predator toying with its prey. I felt like I was going to pass out from the tension. Then suddenly, it went silent. Just when we thought it might have left, the noise came again. But this time from the back of the cabin. It was circling us, studying us, waiting. We barely slept. I spent the night clutching a fire poker, as if that would do any good. When dawn broke, the thing was gone, but the unease lingered. We ventured out to inspect the damage, and sure enough, the door was splintered. Deep claw marks gouged the wood. The ground outside was covered in strange tracks, larger than anything I'd ever seen. They looked like oversized wolf prints, but elongated, as if whatever made them had been walking on two legs. We should have left right then. But Greg, ever the stubborn one, insisted we stay. "It's just an animal," he argued, "probably a weird-looking bear or something. We'll be fine during the day." And for most of the day, we were. We didn't venture too far from the cabin, and we stayed within sight of each other. But as the sun began to set, the tension in the air returned. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. That night, it came back. This time, it didn't stop at the door. Whatever it was began circling the cabin, scraping at the windows, dragging its claws along the walls. We could hear it sniffing, as if trying to find a way inside. I was terrified out of my mind, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. Just when we thought it was going to break through, it stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the noise. We held our breath, listening, waiting for any sign that it had left. Then, we heard a new sound, a scratching, coming from under the floorboards. Jessie cursed, and we scrambled back, watching the floor as something pushed against it from underneath. It was clawing its way up, trying to break through. I could see the boards start to buckle and crack, and I knew we were seconds away from coming face to face with whatever nightmare was beneath us. In a panic, Greg shouted, "The truck! We can make a run for it!" We didn't need convincing. We bolted out the door, barely pausing to grab our things, and sprinted to the truck. I could hear it behind us, breaking through the cabin floor. Its snarl. No, not a snarl. Something worse. Greg fumbled with the keys, cursing while Tim and Jessie yelled for him to hurry. I looked back, and I saw it. Just for a second. A hulking figure, covered in matted fur, towering over the cabin. Its limbs were too long. It moved in a jerky, unnatural way, like it was learning how to use its own body. Greg finally got the truck started, and we tore out of there. The thing chased us down the dirt road. I don't know how far it followed us, but we didn't stop until we were miles away. And to this day, I swear, sometimes when I'm alone, I can still hear that scratching. When we finally reached a town, we stumbled out, dazed and exhausted, trying to explain what had happened, but no one believed us. The police found the cabin in shambles, claw marks everywhere, but they chalked it up to a bear. No one could explain the tracks, though. They were too big, too wrong. I heard rumors later, stories about strange creatures in the Canadian wilderness, sightings of things that shouldn't exist. Whatever it was, it didn't seem to fit into any category I'd ever heard of. It was something old, something that belonged in the shadows of ancient forests, not in the world I knew. As for us, we don't talk about it much. We keep in touch, sure, but that night sits between us like a weight we can't shake off. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can still hear those scratching noises echoing from somewhere deep in the night. My name is Lucas Norris. I was 42 years old when this happened, and I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, if I weren't the one telling this story, I wouldn't believe me either. I had spent my entire career as a marine biologist specializing in Florida's underground rivers and swamp ecosystems. I knew the science of these waters, the tides, the wildlife, the way nature worked in perfect, predictable patterns. But what I saw in Tate's Hell wasn't science. It wasn't natural. I took this trip to be alone. My divorce had been messy. My reputation in the academic world was in tatters, and I had nothing left but my camera and my RV. I told myself this would be an escape, a week-long trip through the swamps of Tate's Hell State Forest, documenting Florida's lesser-known river species. I parked my RV deep in the forest near an old dirt road that led to the Ocklawaha River. No cell service, no tourists, no noise. Just me, the trees, and the black water stretching into the fog. The first 2 days were peaceful. I kayaked through the river, took photos of egrets, turtles, gators. The stillness of the place had a weight to it, like a place the world had forgotten. But by the third night, the stillness turned into something else. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Rotting fish, algae, something decaying. thick enough to make me gag. But the river was clear, the banks undisturbed. I checked my kayak, my supplies. Nothing. That night I woke up soaked in swamp water. I jolted upright in my RV bed, my shirt clinging to my chest, my hair dripping. I knew I had locked the door, but when I checked, it was wide open. Muddy footprints led from the river to my bed. Not mine. I told myself I must have sleepwalked. It had happened before. Stress, exhaustion, logical explanations. But then I found the footprints leading back outside. The next morning I went out to the river with my camera, determined to catch whatever was messing with me. The water was still, untouched. But as I raised my camera, I noticed something strange in my reflection. I was standing still, but my reflection wasn't. It shifted, lagging behind me like an old video buffering. My breath hitched, I waved my hand. The reflection followed, but slower. I stepped back, shaking. Then I saw her. At first I thought it was a log floating just beneath the surface, but then long strands of red hair rose up through the water, tangled and drifting. I squinted, my heart thudding. The shape beneath the hair shifted, a pale face rising from the depths. A woman. Her eyes were dark, empty pits, and her mouth, it was stretching. Wider and wider, rows of jagged teeth spiraling into the void. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a tree root, and I hit the ground hard. When I looked up, she was gone. The water was still. The air was dead silent. I grabbed my camera, hands shaking, and checked the photos. Nothing. The water was empty, but I knew what I saw. That night, the whispers started. I was in my RV writing notes when my radio crackled to life. Static, then a faint wet voice. "Come in the water." I froze. My radio was turned off. The voice whispered again. Closer this time. "Lucas." My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my knife and stepped outside, scanning the tree line with my flashlight, and then I heard it, sloshing footsteps dragging through the water. I swung my light toward the river. She was standing in it, waist deep, staring at me. Her skin was grey, slick with algae. Her red hair floated unnaturally around her face, but her mouth, God, her mouth was stretching open, her jaw unhinging like a snake's, black void inside, like she was about to swallow the night whole. I bolted inside, locked the RV, and forced myself to breathe. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination, a trick of the swamp gas. But when I woke up the next morning, my tires were slashed. My boat was half sunk in the river, and outside my door the muddy footprints were back. I had to get out. I threw my things into my bag, my hands shaking. I could hike to the main road, find help, call a tow truck. But as I stepped outside, I saw something half buried in the mud beneath my RV. I swallowed, digging with my hands, pulling until my fingers found something solid. A skull. But not just any skull. It had a crack along the temple, a missing molar. I knew that skull. It was mine. I dropped it, scrambling back, my heart hammering against my ribs, and then I heard her voice. "You've been here before." I spoke, and there she was, standing at the edge of the trees, grinning. Memories slammed into me, flashes of something I couldn't explain. I saw myself arriving in the RV, setting up camp. I saw her dragging me into the water, her nails slicing into my arms. I saw myself screaming, drowning, sinking into the red-stained depths, and then nothing. And then, waking up in my RV on the first day of the trip. Over, and over, and over. I wasn't on my first trip. I had been here before, and I had died here before. I staggered backward. No, this isn't real. She laughed, her voice like breaking glass. It will be again. The world blurred. The trees spun. The last thing I saw was her hand reaching for me. Then, blackness. I woke up in my RV. The morning sun was rising. My boat was fine. My tires were untouched. My camera was in its case. The memory card, empty. It was the first day of my trip. But when I looked in the mirror, my reflection lagged. And outside in the river, the red woman waited. I used to think there wasn't much in the world that could shake me. After all, my life had been a string of adrenaline-fueled missions, each more dangerous than the last. My name is Roland Van Broek, and I've spent the last 16 years working for a shadowy unit buried deep within the US government, tasked with hunting the things that aren't supposed to exist. cryptids, monsters, creatures that lurk in the forgotten corners of the world. You name it, I've probably seen it or something like it. But there's something about the ocean, the way it stretches out into infinity, swallowing light and hope alike, that's always put a knot in my stomach. So when the call came about a string of disappearances off the coast of Washington State, I was less than thrilled to be the one selected for the mission. The waters there, they say, are haunted by old spirits. Turns out, old spirits were the least of anyone's worries. The local authorities were baffled. 5 people had vanished without a trace in just under a month, all experienced divers, all pulled into the same stretch of water near a place the locals called Dead Man's Cove. No bodies were ever recovered, no distress calls made. They were just gone. My partner for this mission was a man named Cliff Delaney, a former Navy SEAL with nerves of steel and a sense of humor drier than the Mojave Desert. He'd been in the unit almost as long as I had, and we'd been through hell together more times than I could count. If there was one man I wanted by my side when things went south, it was Cliff. We arrived in the small coastal town of Port Lowe, where the locals eyed us warily. We weren't wearing our usual uniforms. Instead, we blended in, looking like just another pair of tourists. It wasn't hard. This place was practically a ghost town. The tourists had stopped coming when the first diver went missing, and the locals weren't too keen on venturing out into the water anymore. Dead Man's Cove was about a mile offshore, a stretch of rocky coastline that dipped sharply into the Pacific. We chartered a small boat and headed out. The sky was overcast, the water choppy. The air was thick with the smell of salt and something else, something foul, like the stench of rotting fish left out in the sun too long. "Ever get the feeling you're being watched?" Cliff asked, breaking the silence. "All the time," I replied, scanning the horizon. "But this time, it's worse." We reached the cove and anchored the boat. The water below was a deep, dark blue, almost black, as if it was hiding something far worse than the usual predators of the sea. We suited up in our diving gear, checking our equipment one last time. Neither of us spoke as we slipped into the water, descending into the depths. The world around us turned into a cold, silent void. The light from the surface faded quickly, leaving us with only the beams of our flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. The deeper we went, the colder it became, and that foul smell grew stronger, clawing at the back of my throat. We hit the seabed at about 100 feet. The ground was littered with jagged rocks and thick strands of seaweed that swayed eerily in the current. We moved forward carefully, scanning our surroundings. Something was off. The usual signs of marine life were absent. No fish darting about, no crabs scuttling along the sand. It was as if the ocean had emptied itself, leaving only silence in its wake. Then we found the first piece of evidence, a mangled diving mask, half buried in the sand. It was cracked, the straps torn, as if by some tremendous force. Cliff picked it up, turning it over in his hands before looking at me with a grim expression. We were on the right track, but it wasn't exactly comforting. We pressed on, the tension between us palpable. The water around us felt thicker, more oppressive, like we were swimming through syrup. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a flicker of something huge moving just beyond the reach of our lights. Cliff saw it too, and we both stopped dead, hovering in the water. I swung my light in the direction of the movement, catching a brief glimpse of something massive and sinuous, its body undulating with an unnatural grace. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized just how wrong this thing was. It wasn't a fish, or a shark, or anything I'd ever seen in the ocean before. It was more like a giant eel, but far more twisted and grotesque. Its body was covered in dark, slimy scales, and its head was wrong, too large, too misshapen, like someone had tried to sculpt a creature out of nightmares and failed. I signaled to Cliff, and we began to retreat, moving slowly, trying not to attract its attention. But it was too late. The creature turned toward us, and I caught a glimpse of its mouth. Rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth, more than any natural creature should possess, each one as long as my hand. Then it attacked. It moved with blinding speed, faster than anything that size had a right to. It struck Cliff first, wrapping its body around him, dragging him down into the sand with a force that sent a shockwave through the water. I tried to reach him, but the creature was too strong, too fast. In a matter of seconds it had torn into him, and the water around us turned crimson with blood. Cliff's scream was muffled by the water, but it cut through me like a knife. I was paralyzed for a moment, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Then the creature's head snapped around, its empty, hollow gaze locking onto me. It released Cliff's body, which floated lifelessly to the seabed, and lunged at me, jaws wide open. Instinct kicked in, and I fired my spear gun. The spear struck the creature in the side, and it let out a horrifying, gurgling noise that sent chills down my spine. But it didn't slow down. I barely had time to get out of the way as it barreled past me, its body crashing into the rocks with a force that sent debris flying. I swam as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my heart racing. The surface felt impossibly far away, but I didn't dare look back. I could feel it behind me, closing in, its presence like a dark shadow over my soul. I made it to the boat, my hands shaking as I clawed my way on board. For a moment, everything was silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then the boat lurched violently, nearly capsizing as the creature rammed it from below. Desperation clawed at my mind as I started the engine, pushing it to its limit. The boat shot forward, but the creature wasn't done with me. It chased us, slamming into the hull repeatedly, trying to knock me into the water. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the attack stopped. The creature must have given up, retreating back into the depths. I didn't stop, though. I kept the boat going until I reached the shore, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The local authorities found Cliff's body the next day, washed up on the shore. The wounds were unlike anything they'd ever seen, deep lacerations, bones crushed as if by some immense pressure. They had no explanation, and I wasn't about to give them one. I left Port Lowe that evening, leaving the investigation to the local authorities. The monster's corpse was found later, its massive body tangled in seaweed on a rocky outcrop near the shore. The thing was dead, and that was all that mattered. As I drove away from the town, the ocean stretched out beside me, endless and indifferent. I knew I would never return to that cursed place again. My mission was over, and so was the creature that had claimed my partner's life. My name is Dylan Gonzalez. I was 49 years old when this happened. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw. I had been living out of my RV for almost a year by then, drifting from place to place, trying to outrun my grief. My daughter Lacey had died in a car crash 18 months earlier. I was at home, drunk on the couch when it happened. I should have been there. I should have picked her up. But instead, I got a call from a state trooper at 3 a.m. Lucci State Forest was the last place she had wanted to go. She had been obsessed with ghost stories, always reading about haunted places and local legends. A few weeks before the accident, she told me about a witch that haunted the forest, some woman who lured people in and made them disappear. "You should take me sometime," she had said. But I never did. So I went alone. I found a secluded spot near an overgrown trail, parked the RV, and shut everything off. No radio, no news, just the forest and me. The stillness wrapped around me like a cocoon. For the first time in a long time, I almost felt at peace, until the sun went down. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No crickets, no wind. The trees didn't sway, even though I could feel the air moving. It was the kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes your ears ring. Then my radio crackled on. It was a police transmission. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the words, "This is dispatch. 911 caller reporting a vehicle collision on Highway 19. Possible fatality. Over." My hands started shaking. That was Lacey's accident. That was her crash. Then another voice broke through the static, whispering, "You don't have to be alone." I turned the radio off. The static kept going. I stepped outside, the hair on my arms standing on end, my breath puffing in the cold air. There were footprints in the dirt leading away from the RV, barefoot, small, like a child's. They led into the woods, and I swear to God I heard Lacey laugh. It was light, airy, her laugh. I hadn't heard it in over a year, but I knew it like I knew my own heartbeat. I should have run. I should have gotten in the RV and never looked back. But I didn't. I followed the footprints. They led me deep into the trees, down paths that hadn't been walked in decades. I stumbled over roots, my flashlight beam flickering as I moved forward. The laughter came again, closer now. Then I saw it. A house. It sat in the middle of a clearing, old and rotting, like something out of a nightmare. Spanish moss hung from the roof like curtains. The windows were broken, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something sour, something rotten. I stepped over broken floorboards, my breath shallow. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols I didn't understand, deep gouges in the wood, like someone had scratched them in with their fingernails. Then I saw the mirror. It was covered in dust, leaning against the wall. My reflection was dim, barely visible. But as I wiped the glass clean, my breath stopped, because I wasn't looking at myself. Lacey was staring back at me. She was wearing the same hoodie she had on the last time I saw her, her hair in a messy bun. Her eyes were wet, pleading. She opened her mouth, but it wasn't her voice that came out. Trade places. I stumbled back, knocking over an old chair. My reflection was normal again. Just me, wild-eyed and shaking. Then the laughter turned into screaming. Outside, the trees moved. Their branches twisted like arms, their trunks bending in ways that weren't natural, and through them, something stepped forward. A woman. She was tall and thin, her tangled black hair matted with moss. Her skin was pale, stretched too tight over her bones. Her eyes were black, bottomless pits, but I could feel them pulling at me. She smiled. Come to me. My body wouldn't move. The air turned thick, pressing against my chest. I gasped, trying to force my legs to run, but they wouldn't. Then I heard Lacey again, crying this time. She was out there. I knew she wasn't really, but God, it sounded like her. Dad? I ran. I bolted through the trees, branches slashing my face, my breath ragged. I didn't look back. Even when I heard her following me, her steps soft, deliberate. I reached the RV and slammed the door, locking it. My heart pounded as I backed away, my eyes locked on the window. She was standing there, just outside, smiling. The RV shook. She was trying to get in. The windows rattled. The walls groaned. And then, silence. I sat there until the sun came up. I don't know how long. I don't remember sleeping. When morning came, she was gone. I started the engine and drove until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop until I was 50 miles away. A few nights later I got a text, an unknown number. We never forget our own. My name's Brian Patel, and this happened to me in the National Forest in Oregon. I grew up in Portland and spent most weekends hiking the trails with my dad. After he passed away, I kept the tradition alive, even though the solitude wasn't quite the same. I wasn't the sentimental type, but being out there brought some quiet to my otherwise loud, chaotic life as an electrician. That particular weekend, I'd planned a 2-day solo trek, something to clear my head and test out some new gear. I wasn't an ultralight fanatic or anything, but I liked keeping things minimal, just me, the trail, and whatever nature threw at me. My route started at Timberline Lodge and cut through some backcountry trails that didn't see much traffic. It was early morning when I set out, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a map in the other. The first few hours were uneventful. The trails were damp from rain earlier in the week, and the scent of pine, mixed with the occasional waft of mushrooms, kept things pleasant. Around noon, I passed an older couple hiking with trekking poles. They waved but didn't stop to chat, which was fine by me. Solitude was the point. It was late afternoon when I noticed the first odd thing. I'd stopped at a clearing to refill my water from a nearby creek. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling, nothing. It wasn't unusual for animals to scatter when a human came stomping through, but this was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I joked to myself that maybe I'd finally reached that perfect peace people were always yapping about in self-help books. As I climbed higher into the denser part of the forest, the feeling lingered. Every so often, I'd hear a snapping twig or see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to squirrels or deer. That changed when I reached the ridge. There was a campsite up there, or at least what was left of one. A collapsed tent lay flattened against the dirt, its poles bent at odd angles. Gear was scattered around like someone had emptied a backpack in a panic. What caught my attention was the cooler, one of those sturdy, bear-resistant kinds. Its lid was wrenched open, and deep claw marks gouged the plastic. I didn't recognize the pattern. It didn't look like bear claws. Whatever did it had talons. I poked around cautiously. A jacket with a name tag, Franklin, hung on a low branch, ripped down the middle like someone had tried to peel it off. That's when I saw the blood. Not a lot, but enough to know something had gone wrong. My stomach tightened. I didn't consider myself squeamish, but the combination of the silence and the blood made the air feel heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I didn't linger. I wasn't about to play hero and investigate further, but I also didn't want to turn back the way I'd come. The campsite had a bad vibe, and if someone was injured, I wasn't eager to meet whatever, or whoever, had caused it. I decided to push forward toward a secondary trailhead about 5 miles out. It wasn't on my original route, but it would get me out of there quicker. The trail narrowed as I descended into a gully. Thick undergrowth swallowed most of the light, and the temperature seemed to drop. My boots squelched in the damp earth as I pushed past ferns that slapped against my legs. About halfway down, I caught a foul odor, like rotting meat mixed with damp fur. My first thought was a dead animal, maybe a cougar kill left to rot, but it was strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumbling noise that didn't sound natural. It wasn't a growl, but it wasn't mechanical either. It reverberated through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and I chose the third option, freeze. I crouched low, scanning the trees, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. I forced myself to move, creeping forward as quietly as possible. The trail curved ahead, and just as I rounded the bend I saw it, or at least part of it. A massive, hulking shape loomed through the trees, crouched over something on the ground. Its limbs were grotesquely long, the joints bending in ways that didn't make sense. It had patches of wiry fur mottled with bare, pale skin. What struck me most was its posture, like a predator that had evolved to ambush. I stayed hidden behind a tree, trying not to breathe. Whatever it was feeding, its movements jerky and almost insect-like. The thing was tearing into something unrecognizable, its talons slicing through flesh with surgical precision. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to retch. The smell was overwhelming. A sudden snap of a branch underfoot betrayed me. The creature's head shot up, swiveling unnaturally as it scanned for the source of the noise. I didn't get a clear view of its face, but I did see its teeth, rows of uneven, serrated spikes that looked like they belonged in a shark, not on land. I bolted. Stealth be damned. I sprinted down the trail, branches clawing at my face and arms. The sound of pursuit was immediate, heavy footfalls crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't dare look back. My pack jostled against my shoulders as I weaved through the narrow trail, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. The trail forked ahead, and I veered left without thinking. Bad move. The path led to a dead end, a sheer drop-off into a ravine. My options were limited. Jump and risk breaking something, or turn and face the thing head-on. Neither seemed appealing. I scrambled up a boulder, hoping to gain some height and buy myself time. The creature burst through the trees moments later, its gangly frame silhouetted against the dim light. Up close, it was worse. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones, and its movements were unnervingly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. It paused, tilting its head as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I fumbled for the small knife in my pocket, knowing it was more symbolic than anything. The creature lunged forward, and I did the only thing I could. I threw my pack at it. The motion startled it, and it recoiled briefly, giving me enough time to leap down the side of the ravine. I tumbled hard, dirt and rocks tearing at my clothes as I slid to the bottom. My ankle twisted painfully, but I managed to scramble to my feet. The creature didn't follow immediately, but I could hear it pacing above, its claws scraping against the rocks as it searched for another way down. I limped through the ravine, following the trickle of water downstream. My only thought was to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The ravine eventually opened up into a clearing, and I spotted a ranger's cabin in the distance. Relief surged through me, though it was tempered by the realization that I wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. The cabin was locked, but I found an axe leaning against the woodpile. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crouched low, gripping the axe and scanning the tree line. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. When it came, it was sudden. The creature barreled into the clearing, moving faster than seemed possible for its lanky frame. I swung the axe as it charged, catching it in the shoulder. The impact staggered it, but the thing didn't go down. It lashed out with its talons, grazing my arm and drawing blood. We circled each other, predator and prey, roles blurring. I swung again, aiming for its head this time. The blade connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a piercing screech. It collapsed, twitching violently before going still. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork. With my arm bleeding and my ankle screaming in pain, I limped back toward the trailhead, keeping an eye on the shadows. I flagged down the first car I saw, a bewildered couple who probably thought I'd lost my mind. Years later, I avoid Mount Hood. Not because I'm scared, but because I've learned to stick to places where nature follows the rules. Or at least pretends to. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies, where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana. Population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. My days are usually filled with mundane tasks, which suits me just fine. I didn't sign up to be some action hero, but that was before what happened in 2014. That night, everything changed. Chesterville sits on the edge of Lake Ver, a slow-moving body of water surrounded by cypress trees and swampland. People here fish, drink, and go about their lives. It was a pretty uneventful Thursday evening. I was sitting in the patrol car near the lake, enjoying the last of my coffee. That's when the call came through. Domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, near the edge of the bayou. Some old shack out there. Probably a drunk couple having a fight. I sighed, thinking about how cold my coffee was going to get by the time I got back. I could have ignored the call. In a town this small, people mostly resolve their issues on their own, but it's my job, and I'm not the kind of guy to leave a job half done. So I punched the gas and headed toward the edge of the swamp, the smell of rotting vegetation creeping into the car through the vents. The air always smells different out there, heavy, like something's growing in the darkness. The address was off the main road. Way off. I had to take a gravel path that was barely wide enough for my cruiser, with branches scraping against the sides like they were trying to keep me from going any further. The place was almost hidden behind thick trees, vines practically choking the building itself. It was an old, decaying wooden structure, more of a cabin than a house. When I stepped out of the car, everything felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just on edge because it was so quiet. And in a town where quiet usually means safety, this felt different, like something was waiting. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a scraping noise from inside, something heavy being dragged across the floor. I called out, "Chesterfield PD, anyone home?" Still nothing. Now I've dealt with drunks, domestic fights, and all sorts of noise complaints, but the sound coming from inside wasn't something I'd heard before. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I tried the doorknob. Locked. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, when I noticed something strange, a set of footprints leading around the back. But not human ones. These prints were larger, clawed, like some kind of animal. But whatever made them was walking on two legs, and they were fresh. I was starting to think this wasn't just some domestic dispute. I followed the prints, feeling a chill in the pit of my stomach. As I reached the back of the cabin, I saw the door was ajar, hanging on its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. The cabin was small, just one room, with a dirty mattress on the floor and a table covered in old newspapers. But what caught my eye was the blood. It was smeared across the floor, thick and dark, leading to a corner where something was slumped. I shone the flashlight on it. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body had been torn apart, like he'd been mauled by something much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. His chest was ripped open, ribs exposed, and his face, well, there wasn't much left to recognize. I barely had time to process the scene when I heard that same dragging noise again, but closer this time, coming from behind me. I turned, heart racing, and shone the light toward the sound. Something was moving in the shadows, something big. At first I thought it was a bear. But bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand on two legs. It stepped into the light, and I froze. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with matted fur and a face that looked almost human, but twisted, distorted, like something halfway between a person and a wolf. Its claws were long, too long for anything natural, and its mouth was smeared with blood, teeth glistening like knives. I didn't hesitate. I drew my gun and fired, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. But it barely flinched. The bullets hit, sure, but they didn't seem to do much more than piss it off. It let out this low sound, like it was irritated more than hurt, and took a step toward me. I backed up, reloading as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I've never been a great shot, but at this range it didn't seem to matter. Nothing was going to stop this thing. It lunged. I dove out of the way, crashing into a shelf that sent bottles and cans scattering across the floor. My head was spinning, but I managed to scramble to my feet and run for the door. I don't know how, but I made it back to the car, slamming the door shut just as it slammed into the side of the cruiser, rocking it on its wheels. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I gunned it back down the gravel path. The thing didn't follow me. It just stood there in the rearview mirror, watching. As I sped away, its shape slowly faded into the darkness of the swamp. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to call it in. But what the hell was I going to say? That some kind of monster tore a man apart and nearly killed me? I thought about it for a long moment, staring at the radio, before deciding to do something I never thought I'd do. I lied. When I called it in, I said I found the man already dead. Looked like some kind of animal attack, maybe a bear, maybe a wild dog. Hell, maybe both. I didn't mention the thing I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one out there that night. I found out later that 2 fishermen had been on the lake, close enough to the cabin to hear the gunshots. They saw something too, something large, moving through the trees. They didn't get a good look at it, but they said it wasn't a bear. Wasn't anything they'd ever seen before, and they swore it walked on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back out there with the sheriff and a couple of deputies. We found the body, or what was left of it. But there was no sign of the creature, just those same strange tracks leading off into the swamp. The sheriff wrote it up as an animal attack, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something didn't add up. I've thought about that night a lot since then. About how close I came to ending up like that poor bastard in the cabin, and about what's still out there, lurking in the swamp. Some nights, when it's real quiet, I wonder if it's still watching. But I've learned not to go looking for answers. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better to let the mysteries stay buried. It was still dark when I arrived at Devil's Tower. The silhouette of the monolith rose above the horizon like a jagged alien structure. The first light of dawn barely touched the sky, but the outline was unmistakable. This place had always felt otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to the same earth the rest of us walked on. I parked the RV in the farthest corner of the campground, away from the few other visitors scattered throughout the park. I wanted isolation. Needed it. Actually, after months of losing myself in work and failing to fix my crumbling marriage, I thought this trip might offer me some clarity. If nothing else, I had my research to keep me focused. Legends of Devil's Tower had fascinated me for years, but one in particular always stuck out, the legend of the Watcher. Native tribes in the region spoke of a spirit that guarded the tower, a being that offered ancient knowledge to those who sought it, but demanded a steep price in return. As a history professor obsessed with ancient folklore, I couldn't resist the lure of that story. I had come to Wyoming to dig deeper into those legends, hoping to uncover something, anything, that might be hiding in the shadows of the tower. I stepped out of the RV, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The towering spires of pine trees loomed around me, creating an unsettling sense of isolation. I unpacked my gear, set up camp, and grabbed my notebook. The plan was simple. Hike around the base of the tower, take some notes, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would finally make all the pieces click. As I set out toward the trail that led to the tower, I passed an older man in a park ranger uniform, grizzled with deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though, alert in a way that made me feel like he saw more than the average person. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," I replied, glancing briefly at his name tag. "Tom, you here for the sights or something else?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. I hesitated. "Research, mostly. I'm looking into some of the old Native American stories about the tower." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Devil's Tower. "The Watcher, huh?" I stopped. I hadn't mentioned that specific legend. He chuckled softly. "Everyone comes looking for something, but you'd do well to leave the Watcher alone, son. Some things don't like being disturbed." I tried to brush off his warning with a nervous laugh. "You don't really believe that, do you, Tom?" He didn't smile. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Just be careful. People who go digging too deep around here sometimes find more than they bargain for." With that, he turned and walked back toward the ranger station, leaving me standing there with a pit forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just local superstition, the kind of thing park rangers said to spook tourists. But as I turned my eyes back to the tower, the weight of his words lingered. By midday, I was deep into my hike, circling the base of the tower, taking notes on the surrounding landscape. The towering rock formation loomed overhead, casting long shadows over the forest below. I felt dwarfed by it, like a child standing at the feet of a giant. That's when I noticed the eyes. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a glimmer of sunlight catching on something in the trees. But then I saw them again, faint, glowing orbs between the branches. They were high up, too high to be an animal, and they followed my every movement. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered there, watching. I wanted to dismiss them as some kind of wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them, something intelligent. Forcing myself to continue, I kept walking, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to see if the eyes were still there. They were always just far enough away to keep me wondering, but close enough that I could feel their presence. When I finally made it back to camp, the unease hadn't left me. I sat by the RV trying to write in my notebook, but my mind kept drifting back to the eyes and the trees, the way they'd followed me, never straying too far but never coming closer either. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campground in shadow. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the purple sky. The fire I'd started crackled weakly, the flames flickering as if they, too, were uncertain about staying here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I was a rational man, after all, a professor, a skeptic. But as the night wore on, that skepticism started to feel more like denial. The wind rustled through the trees and the fire guttered low. Then, just as the last light of the day faded, I heard it, a whistle. It started softly, almost like the wind, but it was too distinct, too deliberate, a single drawn-out note that drifted through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, scanning the darkness. The fire cast faint light around the camp. "Hello?" I called, though I wasn't sure what I expected to hear in return. The whistle came again, sharper this time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the trees, but there was nothing. No movement, just the oppressive stillness of the forest. The whistling stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees made me bolt upright, expecting to see those glowing eyes or hear that eerie whistle again. I told myself it was just my imagination, just nerves from being out here alone. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me, settling deep in my bones. The next day I set out again, hoping to shake the paranoia that had settled over me. I hadn't gone far when I ran into Julie, a solo traveler I'd briefly noticed the day before. She was standing at the edge of the trail, staring up at Devil's Tower, a strange look on her face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as I approached, though her tone didn't match her words. There was something off about the way she spoke, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Yeah," I replied. "I've been hiking around, looking into the old legends. You know about the Watcher?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The Watcher? You're looking for it?" I nodded uneasy. "It's just research." Julie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Watcher doesn't like to be found. You know it watches, but it doesn't want to be seen." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about her was wrong. She seemed too calm, too knowing. The way she stared at me made my skin crawl. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, leaving me standing there, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. That night, the whistling returned, louder this time, persistent. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, eyes darting between the trees. The whistle circled the campsite, moving closer then further away, like it was testing me, toying with me. Then, just beyond the flickering light of the fire, I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of the woods. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, and his mouth was pursed as the tuneless whistle drifted from his lips. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, whistling that same eerie note. My chest tightened with a sudden surge of panic. I stumbled back toward the RV, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud in the confined space. The next morning, I found footprints around the campsite, small indentations in the dirt, leading in circles around the fire. They hadn't been there before. On the final night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of Devil's Tower had become unbearable, nightmares of the stone pulsing, breathing like a living thing. I dreamt of eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, always watching. I had to go to the tower. I had to see it up close. I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, the whistle guiding me, pulling me toward the monolith. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stars above twisted and shifted, unfamiliar constellations blinking in and out of existence. As I neared the base of the tower, I saw her again, Julie, standing at the foot of the rock. Her face pale and her smile too wide. "The Watcher is waiting," she whispered. "It's always been waiting." The whistle grew louder, piercing through my thoughts, driving me forward. I reached the tower, my hands trembling as I touched the cold stone. And then, out of the shadows, the Watcher appeared. It was a massive, shadowy figure, its body indistinguishable from the darkness, but its eyes, glowing, burning orbs that stared into me, through me. It didn't speak with words, but its presence filled my mind, offering me ancient knowledge, secrets of the tower, of the universe, of myself. But the price. I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The more I listened, the more I realized that accepting its offer would mean losing everything. My mind, my soul, everything that made me, me. I stumbled back, tearing myself away from the Watcher's gaze. The whistle reached a fever pitch, and I ran. The ground beneath me shifted and warped as the world collapsed around me. I barely made it back to the RV. When I crossed the threshold, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent. I drove away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The image of the Watcher's eyes burned into my mind. I knew I would never be the same. I thought a week alone in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest would be the perfect way to clear my head after everything that had happened. The divorce, leaving the military, and that nagging feeling I'd wasted years of my life. I figured some isolation would help me reset, so I packed up my RV, grabbed my gear, and drove deep into the heart of the forest. I should have known better when I first pulled into the campsite. I felt that familiar sense of calm I used to get on deployment, a kind of satisfaction that comes with being prepared for whatever the wilderness might throw at me. The Apache Sitgreaves is a vast, rugged place, and this far in you don't see many other campers. That's why I picked it. No people, no distractions, just the forest, my RV, and my thoughts. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV at the edge of a tree line overlooking a deep ravine. The view was incredible. The trees spread out like a sea of green, with the sun dipping low, casting long shadows over the land. I spent the first day hiking, snapping a few photos of the landscape and trying to relax. By nightfall, the temperature dropped sharply, but I welcomed the cold. It felt like the world was trying to numb me, erase the pain I'd been carrying since Rachel left. I lit a small fire, sat by it and let the quiet settle in. That's what I wanted after all, but the silence felt different out here. It wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. The first night passed uneventfully, but something woke me around 3 a.m. I sat bolt upright, listening. There it was again, a sound just outside the RV. It wasn't the usual rustle of wildlife or the distant call of an owl. No, this was different. Slow, deliberate footsteps. At first I thought maybe another camper had wandered into my area, but when I peered through the window, all I saw was blackness, the dense trees illuminated only by the faint moonlight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and biting. I swept the beam of light across the campsite, scanning the edges of the trees. The footsteps had stopped. Nothing moved. The fire had long since died out, leaving behind only a few glowing embers. No signs of anyone. I convinced myself it was probably just an animal and went back inside, locking the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, the hairs on the back of my neck stayed up, like I wasn't alone. By the second day, I was already starting to feel the isolation. The weather was turning colder than I'd expected, and to make matters worse, the RV's heater was acting up. It kept cutting out, leaving the inside freezing. At night, I spent hours trying to figure out what was wrong, but it was no use. I'd have to tough it out. I hiked out again that afternoon, looking for some distraction. The forest was beautiful, but in an unforgiving way. The trails were rough, and after a while, I veered off the main path looking for more secluded spots to explore. I told myself it was for the photography, but really, I just wanted to be somewhere no one could find me. That's when I first saw the carvings. At first, I didn't even notice them. They were subtle, old, just faint marks on the trees. I stopped to take a break and caught sight of one right in front of me, a series of lines etched into the bark, almost like a symbol. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the grooves. It wasn't natural. Someone or something had put it there. As I moved on, I found more of them, scattered and in no particular pattern, but close enough to make me uneasy. They circled the area where I'd set up camp, like some kind of boundary. I shook off the strange feeling gnawing at my gut. This forest was old. People had been here long before me, carving symbols and marks for reasons long forgotten. Nothing to worry about, but I didn't stop worrying. That night I woke up again, the same time as before, 3 a.m. The footsteps were back, closer this time. The sound was unmistakable, soft but deliberate, like someone walking slowly around the RV, testing the ground with each step. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps circled the RV, paused, then resumed. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the flashlight but hesitated. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something else? The footsteps stopped, dead silence. Then I heard the tapping, soft, rhythmic taps on the windows. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The taps grew louder, more insistent, coming from all sides of the RV now. I forced myself to get up slowly and crept to the nearest window. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain back just a little. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness outside. Nothing, just the forest and the shadows. But when I looked again, I saw it. A handprint pressed against the glass, smudged and distorted, like someone or something had leaned in close. The print was too large to be human. Its fingers were long, unnaturally so, and the palm had an odd, warped shape to it. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but the tapping eventually stopped. The air felt thick, like it was pushing down on me, suffocating me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping my hunting knife, waiting for the footsteps to return. By the third day, I was ready to leave. I packed my gear and decided to head out early. Whatever had been out there the night before, I didn't want to find out. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but nothing. Dead. The frustration boiled over into panic. I was stranded. I grabbed my map and decided I'd have to hike out to the nearest ranger station, a few miles away. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't stay here another night, not with whatever was out there. I set off down the trail, moving fast. The cold had seeped into my bones, but I pushed on, hoping to make it before dark. The forest felt different now, darker, heavier. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow hiding something just out of sight. And the feeling of being watched, it never went away. About halfway to the station I heard it again, footsteps that weren't my own. I stopped, listening. My hand rested on the knife at my side. Then I heard a voice. It came from behind me, soft and distant. Liam. I froze. My blood ran cold. Liam, help me. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Rachel's voice, my ex-wife. But she wasn't here. She couldn't be here. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Liam, her voice again, closer this time. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me. I started walking again, faster this time, my eyes darting around, looking for any sign of movement. The voice followed me, calling my name over and over. I clenched my fists, trying to block it out, trying to focus on the trail. But then I saw it. Standing in the middle of the path, not 20 feet ahead. The figure was tall, too tall to be human. Its limbs were long and thin, draped in tattered rags that seemed to shift in the wind. Its face? There was no face. Just a void, a swirling mass of darkness where its features should have been. Its eyes, though, its eyes were glowing, bright yellow, like two embers burning in the night. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I fumbled for my knife, holding it out in front of me, though I knew it wouldn't do any good. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no sense to it. This thing wasn't human. It wasn't natural. The Watcher, something from old Apache legends, stories I'd heard long ago, was real. And it had found me. The thing took a step forward, and I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. I don't remember much of the run. It was a blur of trees and shadows, the forest closing in on me as I tore through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes. The Watcher's eyes burned into my back. Somehow I made it to the ranger station. I don't know how, but when I stumbled into the clearing and saw the small building, I nearly collapsed in relief. I burst through the door, breathless and shaking. The ranger inside looked up, startled, but I couldn't form the words to explain what had happened. I didn't need to. When I finally caught my breath, I told him everything. The footsteps, the handprints, the thing in the forest. He didn't believe me, of course. Why would he? He checked my RV later, saw the scratches and the smudged handprint, but still shrugged it off. Probably just a bear, he said, but I know better. As I sit here now, writing this down, I can still feel it. The Watcher's eyes on me. It's waiting, watching, and it'll follow me no matter where I go. Some things you can't outrun. I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife, Sarah, was the opposite. She loved all that mystical, spiritual stuff. She'd go on and on about how some places had energies, or how she could feel something otherworldly when we'd visit a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it, I just never took it seriously. Now I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it, really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I'd roll my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly. More like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun. The kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I'd built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe. Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange, more like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight. Heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something wasn't right came early the next morning. I'd been outside sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert when I noticed the tracks. Big, too big to be a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They were circling the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was wrong, like whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert. Or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored it. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again. At least I assumed they were coyotes, but the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing, tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked, and it was gone. Swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced. I stood, trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there. Just empty desert. The howl stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I doused the fire quickly and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted, that was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time, they weren't just around the RV. They led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease curdling in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday. Deeper, too. Something was out here. Something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV, and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I hit the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I went outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this. Yet there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but the desert was still dead quiet. That night it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it. Footsteps outside the RV, soft at first, but growing heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still inside, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first I thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the RV, but the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight, just feet from the RV. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its face, it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. It stopped scratching and turned toward the window, as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine for a moment. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out. Had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Mark." I froze. "Mark, it's me." The voice, it was Sarah's. Soft, familiar, and filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Mark, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, It sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mark, come to me." I fell to my head as the scratching returned, more violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside, and the desert was calm again. The tracks erased by the wind. The RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things, I realize now, should never be disturbed. I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife Sarah was the opposite. She loved all that mystical spiritual stuff. She'd go on and on about how some places had energies, or how she could feel something otherworldly when we'd visit a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it, I just never took it seriously. Now I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it, really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I'd roll my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly. More like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun. The kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I'd built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe. Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange. More like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight, heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something wasn't right came early the next morning. I'd been outside sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert when I noticed the tracks. Big, too big to be a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They were circling the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was wrong, like whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert. Or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored it. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again, at least I assumed they were coyotes, but the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing. Tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced. I stood, trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there, just empty desert. The howls stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I doused the fire quickly and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted, that was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time they weren't just around the RV. They led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease curdling in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday. Deeper, too. Something was out here. Something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I hit the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I went outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this. Yet there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but the desert was still dead quiet. That night, it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it. Footsteps outside the RV, soft at first, but growing heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still inside, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first I thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the RV, but the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight, just feet from the RV. It wasn't human. At least, not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its face, it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. It stopped scratching and turned toward the window as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine for a moment. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out, had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Mark." I froze. "Mark, it's me." The voice, it was Sarah's, soft, familiar, and filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Mark, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, it sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mark, come to me." I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the scratching returned. More violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside and the desert was calm again, the tracks erased by the wind. The RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now should never be disturbed. I'm not sure why I chose the Ocala National Forest. It wasn't really on my radar until a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's because Megan always talked about it, how beautiful the pine forests were, the springs. She was the nature person, not me. She practically begged me to take her camping here once, back when we were still together. I kept putting it off, using work as an excuse. Now, here I am in the middle of the forest alone in my RV with nothing but my thoughts for company. I needed a break, that's what my doctor said. Unplug, he told me. You need to find yourself again, as if I ever had a real grasp of who I was to begin with. 2 weeks into my forced time off, I wasn't any closer to finding peace or clarity. I felt off. I didn't realize how addicted I was to being connected. No emails, no social media, no news feeds, just silence and isolation. It was what I thought I wanted. The first night in the RV wasn't too bad. I parked in a secluded spot far from the main road, surrounded by towering pine trees. I managed to set up camp without any major problems. I had a fire going, and for a little while I could almost see the appeal Megan always talked about. There was something peaceful about the forest, about the stillness. But it was the kind of stillness that quickly became unsettling when you were alone. By the time the sun set, the silence had grown thick. The only sound was the wind shifting through the pine needles and, every so often, the distant call of an owl. I tried to read one of the survival books I'd brought, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to her. Megan. We hadn't spoken since the divorce went through. 3 years of marriage dissolved in less than a month. I couldn't even tell you exactly when things went wrong. I just buried myself in work. She begged me to slow down, to reconnect, but I didn't listen. I told myself I was doing it for us, that the stress was worth it in the end. But by the time I realized how much I'd lost, it was too late. The fire crackled as the temperature dropped. I got up to grab my jacket from inside the RV. That's when I first heard it, a soft tapping sound, like something lightly knocking against the side of the RV. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I leaned against the door, listening harder. The tapping continued, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, scanning the area around the RV. The light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. Probably just a branch in the wind, I muttered to myself, though the trees weren't close enough to the RV for that to make sense. I shut the door and locked it. The tapping had stopped, but I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I drifted off, I heard something. Footsteps, rustling things I couldn't explain away as easily as I wanted to. But when I looked outside, the forest was still. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were in the dirt around the RV, large and oddly spaced. Not animal tracks, but not quite human either. They seemed too long, too wide, like someone had been walking on the balls of their feet with unnatural precision. They circled the RV, stopping near the windows before disappearing into the trees. I crouched down to get a better look. The prints were deep, the kind that didn't come from a person casually walking. Whoever or whatever had made them was heavy, deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one around. I considered leaving, but I wasn't going to let some footprints freak me out. Besides, my RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, the engine just sputtered and clicked. The GPS on my phone was glitchy too, pointing me in all sorts of random directions before it finally went blank. Great. Just great. I spent most of the day walking, trying to calm my nerves. I stuck to the trails at first, but as the hours passed, I wandered deeper into the forest. The pine trees stretched up endlessly, their trunks so straight and uniform that I started losing track of where I was. I didn't mind being lost, not at first. It distracted me from the unease that had settled in my chest. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, someone, standing just beyond the trees. I stopped dead, staring at the figure. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally still. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but when I looked again, it was still there. A dark shape, humanoid but wrong, standing among the trees, watching me. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. The figure didn't move. I took a step toward it, and in an instant it vanished, not like it walked away, just gone, like it was never there. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the spot where the figure had been, before I finally turned and hurried back toward the RV. That night, the tapping started again, louder this time, more insistent. I lay in bed, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The rhythmic tapping echoed around the RV, coming from all sides. It sounded like someone or something was circling the vehicle, knocking at the walls, at the windows. I couldn't bring myself to move. Then the footsteps started, heavy, deliberate thuds like boots crunching on gravel. They moved slowly, methodically, pacing back and forth outside the RV. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking, and crawled out of bed. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "You're imagining things. It's nothing." But I wasn't imagining it. I peered through the window, and there it was, the figure, standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness. Its shape was clearer now, a tall, gaunt figure with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The tapping grew more frantic, the footsteps louder. My head spun with fear and confusion. What was it? Why was it here? I bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle I heard a voice. "David." I froze. It was Megan's voice, soft, familiar and unmistakable. "David, come outside." My breath caught in my throat. "Megan," I whispered, barely able to speak. "Come to me." I stared at the door, my hand trembling on the latch. The voice was so clear, so real. But Megan wasn't here. She couldn't be. It wasn't her. "David, please." The voice grew more insistent, more urgent, but something in the tone was wrong. Off. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping and footsteps stopped all at once, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning the forest felt different, lighter somehow. The figure was gone, and the RV started on the first try. I didn't waste any time. I packed up and drove away, leaving the forest behind as quickly as I could. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me, that maybe, just maybe, I didn't leave it behind. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now are better left undisturbed. The darkness of the Wa National Forest stretched before me like an endless abyss. The trees, as ancient as the land itself, rose tall and imposing, blocking any light that might escape from the stars. This was the kind of place I used to love, complete isolation, pure, untouched nature. I was there to study the behavior of some rare owl species and take a few nighttime photographs. At least that was the plan. At first, everything was as expected. I'd parked my trailer in a remote part of the forest, far from tourist trails and campgrounds. The silence that surrounded the area was reassuring. I was used to this kind of environment and loved the challenge of being completely alone, immersed in nature. But that night, the silence felt different, thick, heavy. I finished setting up camp and prepared for a night of observation. The wind blew gently, and the leaves made that soft, soothing sound that always accompanied the beginning of a night in the forest. For some reason, though, I felt a slight sense of unease, as if something was watching me. I ignored it. I knew solitude could play tricks on the mind. I had always been a skeptic. I wasn't the type to fall for superstitions or local legends. I went into the trailer to adjust my equipment. I wanted to set up the cameras and recorders to capture sounds and images of the animals that, with luck, would appear around me. But the first sign that something was wrong came then. My cameras started malfunctioning. The display kept flickering, and the images came out distorted, as if something was interfering with the sensors. I looked at the cameras, confused. They were charged, working perfectly before I left home. I tried again, but the problem persisted. I thought it might be magnetic interference, some kind of atmospheric anomaly that could happen in more remote areas. I decided to step outside and check my phone's GPS, but to my surprise, it had no signal. Okay, I thought, it's not the end of the world. I'm in a remote area. It might just be a matter of finding a higher spot to get a signal. But as the night went on, things really started to get strange. I was outside adjusting the camera lens when I heard the first sound, a low, guttural noise echoing between the trees. It was hard to tell what it was, something deep in the forest. It sounded distant, but it was enough to put me on alert. I knew all kinds of wild animal sounds, but this wasn't familiar. I swept the darkness with my flashlight, trying to locate the source of the sound. But all I saw was the faint glow of trees and the light reflecting off the leaves. The wind seemed to have stopped suddenly, leaving the forest completely still. There wasn't even the sound of insects or owls. Absolute silence. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. I knew that sometimes nature could be like this. Predators could silence the environment, scaring off smaller animals. But even by predator standards, that silence was oppressive. I decided to head back to the trailer and wait until morning. Maybe it was just exhaustion talking, and the darkness made everything scarier than it really was. After all, I had spent the whole day exploring the place. I laid down on my bunk, trying to relax, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't shake it. Then I heard the sounds again. Footsteps. I knew the sound of animal footsteps well, but these were different, heavy, long, with a deliberate drag. I got up slowly, my senses on high alert. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the door. Something was moving outside. With my heart racing, I carefully opened the trailer door, and the flashlight illuminated the ground around me. Claw marks. The ground was scratched, as if something large had passed through. I stood still for a moment, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It could have been a bear or a wolf, but the marks were deep, as if made by something strong enough to tear the bark off a tree with a single swipe. A slight pressure began building in my chest. I wasn't easily scared, but what was happening here was strange, very strange. The next day I drove to the nearest town. I needed fuel for the generator, and I also wanted to ask a local if they had seen any signs of bears or wolves in that part of the forest. I walked into a small grocery store and casually mentioned to the owner, an elderly man, about the marks and the strange silence from the night before. He suddenly grew serious. His dark eyes stared at me and he said in a grave voice, "That's not a bear, son. That's the shadow of the Black Forest." Confused, I asked what he meant by that, and with a worried expression, he told the story of an ancient entity that wandered the forest on nights with a new moon. They say it feeds on travelers' fear, plays with them until it drags them into the darkness. No one who meets it comes back the same. He spoke of the shadow as something that couldn't be defeated, only avoided. I smiled a little, unnerved, thanked him, and returned to the trailer. Small-town superstitions, I thought. Maybe he just wanted to scare me, or perhaps he was exaggerating local legends. But deep down, something inside me felt uneasy. I decided to stay alert, but still rational. That night, the tension grew. The malfunctions with my equipment continued. The trailer's lights began flickering. The generator kept failing. And then I saw them, shadows moving between the trees. Fast, but impossible to make out clearly. Something was out there. I stood up and walked to the window, flashlight pointed into the darkness, and that's when I saw it for the first time. The shadow. It was a tall, misshapen figure, almost humanoid, but its arms were long and grotesque, and its eyes glowed with a pale yellow light. It stood about 30 yards away, motionless between the trees. I felt my blood turn to ice. It was completely still, watching me. The silence returned, heavier than ever. I froze, unable to move for a few seconds. When I blinked, it was gone. My rational mind began to crumble. This couldn't be real. I must have been tired. My mind was probably creating these things, but at the same time my body knew something dangerous was out there, something I couldn't explain. The following hours were a blur of frustrated attempts to fix the situation. I tried restarting the trailer, adjusting the systems, but everything failed. The light flickered and went out. The wind, which had been still earlier, began to blow fiercely. But instead of easing the tension, the wind carried whispers, distant voices, as if the forest itself were trying to tell me something. But I couldn't understand. The shadow appeared again. This time, closer. Its eyes watching me from the edge of the flashlight's beam. It was getting closer, slowly, playing with me. Panic rose in my throat. It was surrounding me, feeding off my fear, just as the old man at the store had said. I tried to leave. I started the trailer's engine, but it died almost instantly. I had no choice but to face this thing. I grabbed an improvised torch and stepped outside, my hands trembling. I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to try something. The shadow moved again, floating between the trees. My eyes couldn't focus on it for long, but I knew it was getting closer. It was as if it was wrapping me in its darkness, draining my sanity bit by bit. Then I remembered. The fear. It fed on fear. I needed to control it. I had to force my mind to work. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to calm my breathing. The panic began to fade, slowly but surely. I opened my eyes, and it was there, standing just a few feet away. But something had changed. It stopped. My controlled breathing, my slowing heartbeat seemed to weaken it. The glow in its yellow eyes dimmed. I didn't know how, but it seemed to be working. With one last desperate attempt, I got back into the trailer and started the engine. It sputtered, choked, but then roared back to life. I hit the gas, the sound of the engine drowning out the whispers and the wind. In the rearview mirror I saw the shadow slowly fading into the darkness. I left the forest that night without looking back. I didn't know what that thing was or how I had escaped, but I knew one thing: I would never return to that forest. The shadow of the Black Forest was real, and I was glad to still be alive to tell the tale. I thought this trip would fix everything. I thought that a week out in the woods, just me and Tyler, would somehow repair the damage from the past year. The divorce hit him harder than it hit me, and that's saying something. I thought maybe, out here in the quiet, away from the distractions of phones and the city, we could connect again, like fathers and sons are supposed to. But from the moment we hit the road, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Tyler barely looked up from his phone the entire drive, earbuds in, scrolling mindlessly. He didn't care about the scenery, didn't care that we were headed to Deadwood Creek, a place I used to go with my own dad when I was his age. It's funny how history repeats itself. My father and I never really saw eye to eye either. He'd brought me out here hoping to teach me how to be a man, how to survive in the wilderness, and now here I was, doing the same with Tyler, hoping the Black Hills would heal something in both of us. I glanced at him as we pulled into the campground. He didn't even notice the tall, dark pines surrounding us, swaying lightly in the wind. A dense fog had settled over the creek, and the sound of water trickling nearby was the only noise besides the RV's engine. It felt different than I remembered, more isolated, lonelier. "This is it," I said, more to myself than to Tyler. "Cool," he mumbled, still scrolling, not even looking up. I sighed, cutting the engine. After we set up camp, I suggested a short hike to check out the creek. Tyler grumbled but followed me. The trail was just as I remembered, narrow, winding through the trees, with the creek gurgling beside us. There was something peaceful about it, but also something off. The further we went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was watching us. We reached the creek's edge, where the water ran fast over the rocks. I crouched down, letting the cool water run over my hand. "This place used to be full of miners back in the gold rush days," I said, trying to make conversation. "A lot of people came out here looking to strike it rich. Some of them didn't make it out." Tyler shrugged. "I guess," he said. I stood up and brushed off my hands, frustrated. You know, you could try enjoying this. He looked up from his phone for the first time and scowled. I didn't ask to come here. I bit my tongue, holding back the argument that wanted to burst out. Let's head back to camp. As we turned to leave, something flickered in my peripheral vision. I stopped, squinting through the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, a dim light floated in the distance. It flickered like a lantern, swaying in the wind. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the trees. Tyler glanced up, following my gaze. "What? That light?" It was gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I'd imagined it. The fog had thickened while we were by the creek, and the woods were growing darker. Never mind, let's go. The first night was when things started getting weird. Tyler and I had retreated to the RV after dinner. He was predictably glued to his phone, while I tried to read a book, but the quiet gnawed at me. The stillness outside felt oppressive rather than peaceful. The wind had picked up, and the pines swayed ominously against the backdrop of the night. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, a soft, barely there sound like whispers carried on the breeze, but as I listened it grew more distinct. Not the wind, voices, faint, disembodied voices murmuring just outside the RV. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "What?" Tyler didn't even look up. "The voices outside." Tyler pulled out one of his earbuds, frowning. "What are you talking about?" I stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but fog and trees. But I could still hear the whispers, just at the edge of hearing, like they were coming from the creek. I shook my head. Probably just the wind. Tyler rolled his eyes and went back to his phone, but something about those whispers unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, the air felt even heavier. Tyler was still distant, sulking around camp, so I suggested another hike, hoping it would clear the tension between us. He reluctantly agreed, and we set off down the trail again, heading back toward the creek. But this time the unease I'd felt the day before was stronger. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch set me on edge. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was constant now, like eyes were following us from the shadows. Then I saw it again. The light. This time, it was brighter, flickering between the trees ahead of us, moving slowly, like a lantern being carried by an unseen hand. "There it is," I whispered, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Do you see it?" He stopped, frowning. What are you talking about?" The light flickered in and out, growing dimmer before vanishing completely. I took a step forward, but Tyler grabbed my arm. "Dad, let's just go back." I wanted to argue, but the look on his face, the fear in his eyes, stopped me. Truth be told, I was scared too. "Yeah, let's go." That night, the footsteps started. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I'd just managed to drift off when I heard them, slow, deliberate steps, crunching on the gravel outside the RV. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but the steps were too heavy, too purposeful. I lay there, holding my breath, listening as the footsteps circled the RV. They stopped by the window, then moved to the door. Tyler stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward the window, slowly pulling back the curtain. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and there, just at the edge of the light, stood a figure. It was tall, dressed in ragged, old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the gold rush era. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of its face, but I could see the gleam of a lantern hanging from its hand. The figure stood perfectly still, just watching the RV. I stumbled back, heart racing. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the fog, the light of its lantern disappearing with it. The next day, Tyler was pale and jittery, his usual teenage indifference replaced with genuine fear. He hadn't seen the figure, but he'd heard the footsteps, and the look in his eyes told me he knew something was wrong. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "I know," I replied. "I'll start the RV. We'll head out." But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine sputtered, then went silent. I tried again and again, but the RV wouldn't start. "We're stuck here," I muttered, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time they were louder, more insistent. The figure was back, pacing around the RV, dragging something behind it. I could hear the heavy scrape of metal on gravel, like chains being dragged along the ground. "Dad, what is that?" Tyler whispered, his face pale with fear. I didn't have an answer. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. "Stay inside," I told him. "No, don't go out there," he begged, grabbing my arm. But I couldn't just sit there listening to the thing outside. I had to confront it. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The figure was there, standing by the creek, its lantern casting an eerie glow over the water. It didn't move as I approached, just watched me with shadowed eyes. "What do you want?" I shouted, though my voice trembled. "What are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its arm, pointing to the ground near the water's edge. There, half buried in the mud, was an old, rusted gold pan. I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me, the legend, the miner's ghost protecting his lost fortune. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and lifted the pan from the mud. As soon as I touched it, the figure vanished. The footsteps stopped. The whispers and the wind fell silent. The air was lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. I stood there for a long time, holding the gold pan, my mind racing. Then, without looking back, I turned and went back to the RV. The next morning, the RV started without a hitch. We left Deadwood Creek behind, and neither of us spoke about what happened. But as we drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching us from the trees. I didn't, but I knew deep down that something had happened out there. Something I couldn't explain. Something I would never forget. And maybe, just maybe, Tyler and I would be okay. I never thought much of my job, honestly. Sure, it's not exactly your everyday gig, but somebody's got to do it, right? I'm Ronald Lopez, one of the government's best-kept secrets. They call us the Cryptid Containment Unit, a fancy title for what we really do. Hunt monsters that people don't even know exist. Most folks think we're a bunch of crackpots, but they wouldn't if they knew what we face out there. My life's never been what you'd call normal, but hell, what is normal anyway? My last mission took me to the deep woods of northern Maine, remote, quiet, a place where people disappear without a trace. That's what happened to a small research team stationed near Moosehead Lake. They were there to study something mundane, moose migration patterns or some other nonsense, but they found something else instead. The last transmission we got from them was nothing but garbled static and a single word: beast. When I arrived at the site, I immediately knew something was off. The air was too still, too quiet, even for a place as secluded as this. The camp was deserted, tents ripped apart like paper, blood spattered everywhere. Not a single body was in sight, just the chilling evidence of a violent end. I've seen this kind of thing before, and it never ends well. I've been doing this job long enough to know when something's hunting you. That feeling started creeping up my spine, a sense of being watched, stalked, even though I hadn't seen a single living thing since I got here. But there was something in the air, a smell almost faint, like sulfur and rot mixed with the musk of damp earth. I knew then I was dealing with something old, something that didn't belong in our world. I found a trail of blood leading deeper into the forest, and like an idiot, I followed it. Maybe that's why people like me don't live long enough to retire. We're too stubborn to quit when the job gets ugly. The trail led to a cave hidden in the dense brush, a gaping mouth of darkness that seemed to swallow the last light of day. I switched on my flashlight, checked my weapon, a modified M4 carbine designed to take down things that laugh at regular bullets, and stepped inside. The stench hit me first, stronger now, almost overwhelming. I could taste it on my tongue, bitter and metallic. I moved deeper into the cave, my boots crunching on bones, both human and animal. The walls were covered in markings, symbols I couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. This place was a lair, and whatever lived here wasn't human. Then I heard it, a sound that wasn't an echo. Something moving in the darkness ahead. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. And then I saw it. A massive, hulking shape crouched over something, gnawing on what I assumed were the remains of one of the researchers. It was hard to make out details in the flickering light, but I could see enough to know this thing wasn't from around here. It was covered in thick, matted fur, almost like a bear, but with twisted limbs that ended in claws the size of my forearm. Its head was like that of a wolf, but stretched and wrong, with a jaw that seemed to open far wider than it should. The eyes! No, not the eyes. Don't think about the eyes. It didn't take long for the thing to notice me. It turned, letting out a snarl that reverberated through the cave. I didn't wait for it to make the first move. I unloaded half a clip into its chest, each bullet hitting with a sickening thud. The thing staggered but didn't go down. Instead it roared, and the force of it nearly knocked me off my feet. I backed up, switching tactics. I had a few specialized rounds designed for things tougher than any normal beast. I reloaded, aiming for the creature's head, but it was fast. Faster than anything that big should be. It lunged at me, and I barely managed to dive out of the way. Its claws scraped across my armor, leaving deep gouges in the Kevlar. I fired again, this time hitting it square between the eyes. The creature howled and dropped to the ground, twitching. I didn't take any chances, though. I fired again, right into its heart. The twitching stopped, and the beast lay still. I took a moment to catch my breath, leaning against the wall of the cave. My hands were shaking, but that was normal after a fight like this. I approached the creature carefully, nudging it with my boot to make sure it was really dead. Satisfied, I knelt down to get a better look at it. Up close, it was even worse. Its fur was matted with dried blood, not just from its kills, but from its own body, as if it had been wounded before and healed over time. Scars crisscrossed its thick hide. Its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth, some broken and rotting but still lethal. The worst part was the claws. Each one was like a curved blade, designed to rip and tear, and judging by the state of the cave, they'd been put to good use. I shuddered to think what would have happened if this thing had made it out of the woods and into a populated area. I took a few photos, standard procedure, then pulled out a small vial of holy water. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but you'd be surprised how many of these things react to it. I sprinkled it on the beast's body, watching for any signs of movement, any last-minute surprises. But it stayed still, and the water just sizzled harmlessly on its fur. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't supernatural. Just a freak of nature, albeit a deadly one. I was about to head back when I heard something behind me, a soft, wet sound, like something sliding over the rocks. I spun around, weapon raised. Nothing. Just the darkness of the cave. My nerves were shot. That was all. The adrenaline was wearing off, and exhaustion was creeping in. I made my way out of the cave, dragging the creature's carcass with me. It was heavy, but I wasn't leaving it behind. The world needed to see what was out here, what was hiding in the shadows of our so-called civilization. When I got back to the camp, it was still eerily silent. No sign of life, just the remnants of the research team's last stand. I loaded the creature onto the back of my truck, securing it with chains. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something slinking through the trees, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I floored the gas pedal, leaving the camp and whatever else was out there behind. Back at the base, they were waiting for me. The usual suits and scientists, eager to dissect the latest find. I didn't say much, just handed over the evidence and left them to it. My job was done, and I was ready to put this one behind me. But as I drove away from the base, heading back to my cabin in the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that there were more of those things out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble into their territory. I've dealt with plenty of monsters in my time, but this one felt different, like it was just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know what's out there, but I know it's something we're not ready for. And when it comes, I'll be there. Because that's what I do. I hunt monsters, and I make sure they never get the chance to hunt us. The last thing I did before heading inside was check my weapon, make sure it was loaded. Because out here, you never know what's going to come knocking, and I'm not about to be caught off guard. Not again.